Okay, so okay, Tanse Bonjour, good morning. We thank you for joining us today for the first annual Food Studies Symposium. Please ensure that your microphones are turned off and you can choose to keep your camera on or off. Please take a moment to view the program, which is included in the chat with the link. And today we'll be recording our symposium, but we will be pausing the recording during our opening prayer with Elder Goodstriker, who I have on the phone with me today, as well as pausing during our Q&A discussion sessions, our break times, and our lunch. And so the recording of the keynote address, all of our presentations and panel will be made available on the Calgary Institute for the Humanities YouTube channel in order to engage public audiences that were not able to make it today. So now I will introduce myself as one of the conveners of this event. Nyantoradega, tika Chelsea Klinke, aune tika edi umliman noberete, dinune Calgarite, aune titas reviere kuetebdo. So I've greeted you in Nobere, which is a dialect spoken in Panama, where I lived for several years with a Nobe community who I call my family. And my name in Nobere is Edi Omlimon, and my given name is Chelsea. And so I also symbolically gift my Nobe family in Panama the medicine of sweetgrass to heal from the pains and losses that they're experiencing right now from the pandemic. So I've learned so much from their teachings with, agriculture and food studies and the connection of that with their cultural teachings. And so it pains me that they're in pain and I offer them healing. So I've also learned a great deal from Mino Gijo Kokwe, or Kathleen Absalon, who emphasizes that situating oneself is really essential to understanding the position that we come from, but as well as the positions and epistemological frameworks that we are not. And so to situate myself for you now, I am a non-Indigenous settler scholar from Delaware in the US, which is home to the Lenni Lenape, Nanticoke, and Assateague peoples. And as a PhD student in anthropology, engaging in food studies, I'm privileged and extremely grateful to be living and learning in Mohkinstsis, which is colonially known as Calgary. And Mohkinstsis is the Blackfoot term for the confluence of the Bow and Elbow rivers. And so as our food studies group is dedicated to working with the land and helping plants grow and talking all about food, it's really important that this work is carried out in a good way, in good spirit. And so part of that is acknowledging the traditional territories upon which we are living and learning and visiting. And so the University of Calgary is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nation, comprising of the Bearspaw, Wesley, and Chiniki bands. And Mohkinstsis is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And so recognizing the ancestral connections of the Indigenous peoples of this land is only the first of many steps in the process of truth and reconciliation and sapatsima, or collaborating in a good way. And as farmers and foodies, it is our responsibility to engage with decolonial practices whose purpose is this dismantling of the oppressive structures and relationships to the land that really prevent people from moving forward together in a good way. And so if you're joining us from outside of Treaty 7, I do invite you please to write in the chat, acknowledging the traditional territories upon which you are listening and learning today. Woo! So to lead us in a good way with an opening prayer, we have on the phone with us Elder Evelyn Goodstriker. And she is a Lakota Dakota from Standing Buffalo First Nation in Saskatchewan and Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. She grew up experiencing shifting education policies of the federal government, attending day school, residential school, and eventually integrating into the public school at Fort Qu'Appelle in Saskatchewan, where she attained a grade 12 education. Evelyn earned a Bachelor and Master's of Education from the University of Lethbridge and has been in the education profession for many years as a classroom teacher and administrator. Evelyn has enjoyed her long career as an educator and cultural advisor. She loves working with students, parents, educators, and anyone who wants to engage in the excitement of learning. Now, if we were in person today, we would be gifting Elder Goodstriker tobacco as well as a blanket because we are engaging in ceremony and research as ceremony. So I will be kind of virtually presenting this today, and she will be receiving these gifts today in her home. So I will now pause the recording. And we appreciate you so much and hope you have a healthy and happy rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Bye. Wonderful. So now to lead us in welcoming remarks, we have Dr. Noreen Humble joining us. She is the Professor of Classics at the University of Calgary and current Acting Director of the Calgary Institute for the Humanities, which is the umbrella institute that our Food Studies Interdisciplinary Research Group is working under. So Dr. Humble, if you would like to lead us in a few words.
And thank you so much, Chelsea, for inviting me to give a few opening remarks today, and welcome everyone. The Calgary Institute for the Humanities was founded in 1976 and is the oldest humanities institute in Canada, with a long history of civic engagement and of hosting events which bring groundbreaking scholars and scholarship into conversation with the broader community. In everything we do, we seek to contribute to the public good by promoting the core values of the humanities. And though over the years, the Institute has informally supported many research networks, in 2015, we formalized this practice by instituting interdisciplinary working groups. These have grown from there were 3 in the first year, and we now have 10 currently working in 2020, 2021 in this most difficult of years. The aim is to encourage faculty and graduate students from different disciplines to explore common research interests and encourage collaborative research projects. The Food Studies Interdisciplinary Working Group, now in its 2nd year, is an outstanding example of what can be accomplished by such collaborations. Already they have received a major grant for a collaborative international workshop, which will bring together scholars and activists from around the world into conversation. And although that workshop has had to be postponed because of the pandemic, it has not slowed this group down, as evidenced by today's symposium, which their dynamic and engaged graduate students have been instrumental in organizing. The lineup of speakers today beautifully illustrates the core mandate of this working group to draw together activists and scholars who are interested in building more sustainable and socially just food systems. So I know we are in for a series of very engaging and important discussions about food as a tool for social change. And again, with our opening speaker, I will not be able to participate in the whole proceedings today, which is very disappointing. I have to go off and teach now, but I will pop back in, and I wish you a wonderful day of conversation and discussion. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Humble. We really appreciate you being here today and sharing with us those welcoming remarks. It has also been an honor to organize this event alongside my dear colleagues, Gertrude Samar and Simon Koots, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. And we are really also grateful for the help of our food studies affiliates today during this symposium. Tatenda Mambo, who is our IT helper, go-to, is going to be key today, as well as Abby Landon and Charlotte Spring, and Sean Lindsay from the CIH, who has been so helpful this whole year. We also could not have organized this event without our food studies research group conveners, including Dr. Marit Rosol, who is the Canada Research Chair in Global Urban Studies and Professor of Geography here at the University of Calgary, as well as Dr. Ben McKay, Assistant Professor of Development and Sustainability, and also my supervisor, who is wonderful. And so they will now provide our final welcoming remarks before we begin with the keynote.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Noreen, and thank you all for coming and participating in this event today. As one of the conveners of the CIH Food Studies Working Group, along with Dr. Rosol, we'd just like to welcome everyone to what we think and well, what really promises to be a very exciting day of presentations and discussions and debate and engagement. Just to give you a bit of a background, we established this working group last academic year with the aim to really build and foster a network of food studies scholars at the University of Calgary and the wider community that was really missing, as sometimes we all work in our individual disciplinary silos. We wanted to really bring together folks working on similar issues, but from different perspectives and different disciplines, which is, I think, what we've done, what we've accomplished, and what this event speaks to today. So working across these disciplines, what we do is try to promote critical scholarship from this broad area and interdisciplinary area of food studies, and engage with both faculty and students from various departments within the university, but not only that, also with scholars, activists, and community leaders outside the university. And I think that we have kind of the folks represented here at the symposium today speaks to this networking and this diversity. So with that, I'll just pass it over to Dr. Rosol, but I'd like to welcome everyone to the event.
Hello, and also a big welcome from myself, Marit Rosol from Geography, and thank you so much for your kind words, Noreen. We really appreciate all the support and help we have received from the CIH, and we couldn't do without you. So over the course of the 2 academic years, we have held many meetings, hosted guest speakers, engaged with scholars, activists, community leaders, as we already heard. And we have been very successful and very happy to assemble a vibrant network of people interested in food studies across Calgary and beyond. And we are especially fortunate to have such a dedicated group of graduate students who have expanded this network and organized this event this year, the first of its kind. So very, very big thanks to Chelsea, Klinke, Gertrude, Samar, and Koots for all their efforts in putting together this symposium. And of course, to all our other food studies affiliates who have offered their help, to Tender Member, Abby Landon, Charlotte Spring. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, again, grateful to the CIH, Sean, Lindsay, Noreen, Humble, and Jim Ellis for their ongoing support. So now, without further ado, let us begin the first annual Food Studies Symposium on food as a tool for social change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosol. So today also we have joining us is Maria del Carmen, and she is an Ecuador-based experiential educator and graphic artist focused on organizational development. And she will be recording a graphic rendition of our keynote that's about to begin, as well as our panel sessions. And this graphic will be made available on our website upon her completion. One more thing to note is that today we have a special draw prize for attendees, an Aksayop Nutsky cookbook. And this was created by one of our panelists, Chantel Tallow. And so each session I will be randomly drawing 1 to 2 winners, and then all winners will be announced during the closing remarks at 4 o'clock Mountain Time. So now I invite Gertrude to present herself as well as our keynote address.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Gertrude Samar. I'm an MA student at the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, originally from Ghana, the coast of West Africa, and part of the Fanti and Wassa tribes in Ghana. Our keynote address today is going to be from Dr. Priscilla Settee, and it's on Indigenous food sovereignty, a tool for social change and solidarity. Dr. Priscilla Settee is a member of the Cumberland House Swampy Cree First Nations and a professor of the Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. where she teaches courses on Indigenous food sovereignty and Indigenous food economies. She is also an adjunct professor for the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Manitoba, where she serves graduate students on Indigenous food sovereignty. Dr. Settee has authored several books, and her latest co-edited book, Indigenous Food System Concepts, Cases and Conversations, was released in 2020, last year. Dr. Settee is a David Suzuki Research Fellow whose research looks at the impact of climate change on trappers' lives. She is also part of a research team that was awarded the Rockefeller Foundation Food Vision Finalist Prize for Research in 33 region and in the area, a grant that's given to 10 groups throughout the world. So without much ado, I invite Dr. Priscilla Settee from the University of Saskatchewan as our keynote speaker.
Good morning. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we had recurring problems with our Zoom. And so tragically, you must pretend that I am a radio and turn up the volume. I apologize for this, but anyway, you know, it's kind of a cultural trait to be a good listener. So I will be practicing my talking skills and you can practice your listening skills. Anyway, I'm going to give my original talk was to be approximately 45 minutes. It might be a little bit of a stretch to expect you to listen that long, so I will play it by ear. I had a lovely PowerPoint prepared. I still do, but I will be the only one seeing it. I perhaps can send it to the organizers later. So first of all, I want to start by thanking my colleagues for putting this amazing program together. I think that, you know, it's these kinds of actions and developments that are really profoundly solidaritous in nature and really help to move all of us to move forward. So I want to greet you, my relatives, wherever in the world you are listening in from. And I want to say that the topic of food sovereignty is an opportunity to unite us around very urgent issues. And I think nowhere has that been demonstrated more clearly than in the human crises we are facing today, that it's been demonstrated by the COVID virus. And so Indigenous people in the world represent about 4% of the global population of humanity. But we also live in communities that represent a very, very high percentage of biodiversity that has been under our care for millennia. In fact, if you look at the places where biodiversity is the greatest, there you will find the surplus and the numbers of human languages that are very, very dense. So that is to reflect the amazing biodiversity that Indigenous people have been caretakers of for many, many hundreds of years. And our languages reflect that. My own language, the word for people in my language reflects something to the effect of we are people of the land or people of the earth. And I know this to be true for other tribals throughout the globe, that often our names are derived from the land. And wherever I have worked, this is a true fact. So, however, we all know, or we should know, that Indigenous struggle has been one of fighting or trying to decolonize. And back when I was a young student you know, the word decolonize didn't even enter our vocabulary because it wasn't a study, a field of study where we were taught, or we were not taught about decolonization. But over the years, this has grown, and now we understand some of the developmental, so-called developmental challenges that we face as Indigenous people as very much related to the capitalist paradigm of development, which has really affected us in very negative ways. And so whenever I give a talk, I try to frame my discussion in that worldview that we are Indigenous people within a model of development that doesn't work for us. And daily we are seeing that we are sharing that stage with others who become disenfranchised from the land. And so moments like this, when we have a chance to meet up with colleagues from different parts of the world, is really an opportunity for us to think deeply about those facts, the model of development, where we fit into it, who is with us, and how do we work together to ensure your future. I'm assuming that many of the listeners are young people, students, many, you know, that I teach throughout the year. And I want to say that as a professor and as a senior, I really believe in the power of the youth through my students and through the actions I've seen in my community, that the power of the youth is what is going to save us. And we see that demonstrated daily in positive and sometimes not viewed as positive, but demonstrations and, you know, youth saying, enough is enough. We really need to look at what we've done to the world, what we're doing to the world, what our elders have done to the world, and figure out a new path. So that's the context that this talk is going to approach. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes on my frame of reference. It was read out in my bio by the previous speaker. I'm a Swampy Cree First Nation, and this Swampy Cree are one linguistic group of the larger Cree tribe in Canada. And so you'll find that Cree are located all across Canada. And I always say in my travels, behind every tree is a Cree. So you have to really be careful who you are talking about because we're everywhere. Of course, that's a little joke, but it's not too far from the truth. So I pride myself in being not only a scholar, but an activist for the land, of which I've been for decades, many decades. And I'm also a fabric artist, and my art focuses on Cree art forms with a contemporary focus on preserving biodiversity and our Indigenous knowledge. Several books that I have undertaken reflect my research that includes South Africa, within South Africa, South America, the South Pacific, including Vanuatu and Hawaii, South America, including Peru and Bolivia, and more recently, India and Asia. And I've been privileged to work with community-based scholars in all of those countries, in all those regions. And I can give the organizers of the conference links to the books that I've written that reflect that international Indigenous knowledge. So in terms of the topic of today, we're talking about food sovereignty as a tool for really building solidaritous links. So if we look at our food systems, I think from our perspective, we see a huge related health crises. So for example, in First Nations communities, We have the highest rates of diabetes and other preventable deaths or illnesses. And now we know that COVID has struck Indigenous communities like no other community. We are at-risk communities because of the general state of health that is often related to the availability of good food, to the breakdown of the natural environment. And certainly my research has looked at all of that as examples of clear cuts, dams, mines, all of Western development that has severely undermined the integrity and the ability of our lands to provide healthy foods as they did long ago, like as they did, you know, up to as recently as 50 years ago. So this development crisis has created a food crisis, but it hasn't only created this crisis for us. It has resulted in widespread environmental crises, which we have never seen the like of before. We are seeing warming temperatures. We are seeing, and here's where I got into some beautiful pictures of, you know, the ice fields breaking away in Antarctica and in the Arctic, and the widespread fires in California, in Australia, in Brazil. And this is in part largely due to the industrial food system that we are experiencing or victims of today. So while we've been able to produce more foods, the method and the distribution have still proven disastrous for our communities. And there we get into this discussion about food sovereignty. If we don't have control over the production and the distribution, and if the foods are not culturally appropriate, we really need to examine whether that is food sovereignty. A large part of the struggle that we see today is to produce more food, such as what the Green Revolution did decades ago. And the Green Revolution was very productive at producing more food. But because a lot of the ways that it was produced, it was outside the means of people that lived in poverty. For example, if you didn't have massive water systems, hookup systems, you were unable to hydrate your crops. If you didn't have the fertilizers and all of the tools that come with massive large-scale farming, again, you were left behind. So what happened during the Green Revolution was that more food was produced, but because it was out of the production of the people who needed it the most, it was a big failure. So that's something to bear in mind when we talk about Indigenous food sovereignty. And I'm going to get into the 6 principles of that before I conclude my talk. So we have an industrial food system that's heavily reliant on pesticides, herbicides, Western science, large-scale methods of production. And this has resulted in the loss of biodiversity, the loss of local autonomy, and the loss of small farming communities. I live in a central province of Canada where the family farm, which our province was built in part on, is all but dead. And they have been replaced by these massive farming initiatives that are heavily subsidized by the Canadian government. But when it comes down to the small farmer that really produce a lot for the community, such as jobs, a pleasant way of life, you know, things that build community, those small farmers have not the same level of financial enjoyment as the large corporate farms. So this has really caused a big change in our entire community in this province and in other provinces that are farming communities. So when I give this talk, we have to ask ourselves, what can be done? What can we do? What is the role of our disciplines, be it education, be it law, be it the sciences, be it economics? What is the role of our disciplines? How can we successfully build coalitions and solidaritous relations to address exactly what I have described? So Western development, we know, has put democracy at risk and the world in a state of peril. And this has led to financial and human waste. And some of the communities that I work with describe the violence on the land, like the pillaging of the land, as reflective to the violence on our bodies. There have been young women's groups that have been very vocal about that. The fact that there are over 2,500 missing and murdered Indigenous women in North America is testimony to that violence. And the violence that's felt on our bodies is reflected to the violence that is felt on the land. So what we are doing today is building an Indigenous response to this violence. And I'd like to talk a little bit about my own community of Cumberland House. It's at the end of the road up the northeast side of my province, and I hope some of you will look on the map when this is finished. My community was hugely impacted by a dam that was built in the 1940s, about 40 miles south of my community. And in no less than 50 years, actually fewer years, probably 10 years, we saw my community go from one of a very productive traditional economic base to one where in the early 90s, because people had been removed off the land, we had 19 attempted suicides among displaced youth that were really disenfranchised from this previous way of life. And not only that, but the parents of those kids too. I just am completing a David Suzuki Research Fellowship. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I talked to trappers and found out the impact, the deepening impact of that environmental crises on their traditional. So a lot of the large animals, like the four-leggeds, a lot of them are moving south, or a lot of their feeding grounds have been impacted by the constant fluctuation of the water that is let out and then held back through the dam. And everything under those large trees that have been drowned has also disappeared. And this is not only happening in, my community, but it's happening all through the north. The province has recently given a company out of British Columbia full clear-cut rights to our northern forest. And so we are joining forces with forest protection groups to try and address this. Again, this year, our lovely peat moss has been signed away to outside companies. And the trappers in the region are really concerned about the peat moss being harvested at a rate that it can't recuperate, because it takes thousands of years for these lovely peat mosses to regenerate. And they have a very perfect system of cleaning the land, cleaning the water. But without peat moss, our lands are continuing to, deteriorate. So, and the first responders to this has been women. Not only in our north, but all throughout the globe, women are standing up. And I'm not saying that to pit male against female, but just to recognize that, women appreciate the impact of environmental degradation, and it's linked to man camps where women have been routinely disappeared, murdered, raped. And so women have had no choice but to stand up, speak our truth, and try to build strategies for survival. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what do Indigenous people bring to food sovereignty. And if we look around the world, we find that the majority of our foods as we know them today have their beginning in Indigenous roots. But more importantly, this relationship with food is one very much reflective of cultures throughout the globe. In my language, in my culture, we have a word called Bimatsuin, which means the good life. And that's the name of my second book. And these are, Bimatsuin represents the good life according to Indigenous values, relationships, and concepts of respect. And this relationship reflects care for the natural and human and other world. And so these contributions to the world food are seldom recognized. And, you know, the variety of cultivated plant species is legion. For example, and this is just one example, but corn has like several thousand varieties. But one of the problems is that these varieties are slowly disappearing or have been disappearing. And this is not taught in most schools, though. And so while we are busy creating monopolies of the various seeds and varieties, they are disappearing. But luckily, the food sovereignty movement has created a fight back strategy where we have communities of seed savers. So I have been in very good company with seed savers, talking about how to freely gift these seeds as they are done in certain parts of the world, and how to preserve them beyond what is apparent for now. So it is important for this fact to be acknowledged in all of our educational process. It is very important for educators to get history right. And now when I talk about history in Canada, if anyone knows about some of the historical food studies books, and if you don't, I really encourage you to look at the work of James Daschuk in his book, Clearing the Plains. I also encourage you to look at the work of Sarah Carter. They both document through extensive research not only the contributions of Indigenous people, but how the state was routinely undermining Indigenous farming communities. And, you know, this could be in response to the pressure by early settlers who felt under threat because Indigenous farmers were outdoing the settler farmers. And so they pressured the Canadian government to draw back on any aid given to Indigenous farmers. And so again, this is history that isn't studied commonly in food studies, but it's very much a part of our official history. But so too is the resistance movements throughout the globe, including here in Canada. And the work that I teach, the work that I do within the Academy, talks about these really important struggles by people who are paying attention to what's happening with the monopolization of crops and seeds, and really working to prevent that or to turn that around. So, for example, this has led to a widespread disappearance of farmers, small farmers, and local food producers. In 1950, for example, there was some 60 to 40% of the world's population were farmers. But over the years, this number has disappeared, like really lessened. And now we see this decline is directly parallel to the direct growth of multinational agribusinesses. And this is something that we should be very concerned about as students, as professors, because this really flies in the face of the concept of food sovereignty. Once that's business of food is taken out of our hands and put into the clutches of agribusinesses, we need to be very observant and very cautious about the impact in our communities. How is all of this maintained? Well, it is maintained by a global order of governance through the free trade agreements, through things like unilateral laws that were written in the prairie provinces here in Canada that handed the land over to the province for out of the hands of Indigenous people. Now, it's not that simple, but basically what the federal government did in the 40s on the prairie provinces was to sign a unilateral agreement called the Natural Resources Agreement. And in it, it handed all the power over to the province. So everything, every profit that's made off the land goes to the province. And so they totally abrogated any notion of treaty rights, and we still live with that impact today. So along with the international trade agreements is a host of international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and their structural adjustment programs, which basically leave so-called third world countries and developing nations at the mercy of these huge financial institutions. So, for example, sometimes when Canada agrees to give aid to Kenya, say, well, it's on the condition that these countries accept genetically modified seeds, or they don't get aid. Now, we don't like that. We think that that really undermines any sense of sovereignty in African nations. And when I first started this work around intellectual property rights of communities, it was Africa and India that really challenged these state institutions, these financial institutions, and these trade deals, because they knew that these agreements would even, bring them even further to their knees. We can't talk about food sovereignty without talking about food justice. And there is at least one group that works with immigrant workers, primarily in Ontario and in BC, Food for Justice. And we know through the business of agribusiness that agribusiness has been responsible for the most deaths associated with it. And we turn to Human Rights Watch, for they have reported hundreds of deaths over this last decade that is directly related to people being killed in disputes over large-scale agriculture projects. And people's deaths are being followed. Death in agribusiness is being followed by the oil and mining industry. And a really good publication that documents the deaths and the atrocities done by agribusiness is in a magazine called Grain, and that's spelled Grain. And so what it means to be an Indigenous person today is not only losing your land, but losing your life. And poaching and logging were tied for third place, with many deaths reported in the poaching and logging industry. And we see that happening in Brazil. And we also, 2 years ago, celebrated, or not celebrated, but acknowledged the loss of our sister, Berta Cáceres from Honduras, who was visited, like many activists are in the so-called developing regions, by a knock at the door at midnight. An armed man killed her in her home. And her legacy has been taken up by her daughter and other youth throughout the world. So the point that I'm trying to summarize here is that the food sovereignty issue is very much about a food justice framework, about who is being killed, about who is being discriminated against. And the food justice movement in Canada, largely led by immigrant farmers, and has told us that often the foods that we appreciate on a daily basis as Canadians is produced under very inhumane conditions. Farmers are brought in from India, from Mexico, from the Caribbean, and they are never given full citizen rights. They are allowed to produce food for us, but as soon as they get injured on the job, they are sent back to their home country because they are no longer useful to us. So the point that I am making here is that we must really acknowledge that there is a very grave food justice issue in the food struggle. I'm going to, let's see, wrap up fairly shortly here. But I want to read just a brief quote from the Justice for Migrant Workers. And from their website, it states, "I wish we would stop focusing so much on food itself and start focusing on people. It's people who grow, process, make, and waste food. When food has such potential to nourish and enliven communities, it is essential to consider and act in ways that alleviate chronic disadvantage and at the same time address exploitation. Beyond critique, we can demand that we at least want a living wage and better conditions for all the people who put food on our table." So I am going to just spend a few more minutes on what we can do, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So let me just address 6 food sovereignty principles. And this is taken from La Via Campesina. If you haven't heard about this wonderful women-led organization, please check them out online. Food sovereignty focuses on food for people. It values food providers. It localizes food systems. It puts control locally. It builds knowledge and skills. It works with nature, and it's different from food security. So in closing, some of the organizations that I work with across Canada and the world are the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, who really offer some practical research on how we can adjust budgets, national, provincial, and local budgets, to reflect the needs, the food needs of people, not only the food needs, but all needs, like daycare needs, because all of these social support networks are very much linked together. Another one that I work with is the Seed Save Canada, and that's located in Ottawa. And we, all over the world, have numerous projects that we support throughout the globe on seed saving. Actually, it's called Seed Change Canada. We just changed our name. I also work with the Cultural Conservancy, which is an amazing international organization that, again, supports local non-governmental organizations through funding and expertise and research, women's groups, youth leadership. And the purpose in both of these groups is to make a really important link between academia and communities, because we in academia have the privilege of knowledge building, and we need to remember that for the sake of our communities. And it's also really important that we take leadership to work with other colleagues to recognize that, the importance of international linkages and networking, teaching and research, because we are on the horns of a, serious climate change, largely led by, the model of development and an industrial nature of agribusiness. So we need to look at that critically, and we need to design and develop and really use our power as academics, as learners, as community-based people, as Indigenous people. So finally, I'm going to close my talk with a quote from Samar Amin. Samar Amin passed away 2 years ago. He was an Egyptian, French, Marxian economist, political scientist, and world system analyst. And I want to close with his quote, because like him, I believe our approach must be with a view of the global in mind, but of course focusing on the local. And from his book entitled The World We Wish to See, and the fine print says Revolutionary Objectives in the 21st Century. Samar Amin says, capitalism is a world system. Its victims can effectively face its challenges only if they are also organized on the global level. However, the unequal development associated with the global spread of capital has always presented serious difficulties for the internationalism of peoples. Here, I propose to identify the origin and nature of the obstacles that impede a convergence of today's diverse struggles against capitalist domination and exploitation. And so what that means, in my view, is that we need to recognize the forces that we are up against. And food is a really important place to do that, because we all need food, because food production is a joyful exercise in any community. It's also hard work. But it also really questions power structures that we can examine and that we can empower ourselves with. And this is something that is needed in the world today. We need a good dose of optimism. We need our youth to be leading in front with the support of the elders. We need our academic institutions to be creative and bold and to stand up to, some of the powerful institutions that really put people on their knees. So I'm going to close there. I would invite questions, maybe a couple. And thank you all for being here, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priscilla Settee. Surely behind the symposium tree is the Cree, Dr. Priscilla Settee. Thank you so much. And we are grateful for sharing with us your insights on Indigenous food sovereignty and food justice and the power of the people. So for our Q&A, we are going to pause the recording.
For our next session on the politics of food. My name again, Marit Rosol. I'm a professor of geography here at the UFC, University of Calgary, and I have the privilege to moderate this first block. And we will have 3 presenters who will present for 50 minutes each, and we will take questions at the very end for all presenters together. And just to let you know again, to the presenters, I will give you 5 and 2 minute markers in the chat. So if you can, please monitor that. And I'm afraid we have to cut you off after 15 minutes, more or less, so that we can keep the schedule. And without further ado, the first presenter is Dr. Lidio Valdez. He is originally from Peru. He loves Peruvian food, and he is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology here at the University of Calgary. So, Dr. Valdez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much to the organizers for allowing me to talk to you and share some of the ideas of my most recent research. I guess this the way you put together the schedule is more or less chronological, and that allows me to speak first in this session. So we are going back in time, and because first of all, I am an archaeologist. I believe, as an archaeologist, I strongly believe that we have much to learn from the past, and in this case, from the Inca states. So I have some ideas here that I will share with you, and to learn about what the Inca did with food to achieve their political agenda. So first of all, I will share with you some ideas about what anthropologists or scholarly research has argued about food. And then in the second part, I will take you to show the most recent result of my most recent research about what the Inca did with food and what were the achievements of this practice employed by the Inca, perhaps other peoples, other cultures before the Incas. So a few ideas here. Food, as probably most of you know, is a basic subsistence resource, and thus it is utterly essential for human existence. This is because as living organisms, we need food in order to survive. Without food, as the previous speaker mentioned, without food we can perish, and that might be the future of humanity if we don't do anything to prevent that from happening. So food is something very serious issue, very important topic that we have to think about it, not only because we need them, but also as a species, we need food to be still around in the face of this planet. Beyond the capacity of nourishing our basic fundamental need to survive, food is also a powerful symbol of our cultural identity. Because in the way we process food, in the things we eat, the way we eat, and all other things attached to this, shows who we are as members of specific cultures. So these are other aspects that we can explore studying food. It's not only eating, it also says about each of us. Food also plays a prominent role in establishing social bonding and political alliances. Indeed, scholarly research shows us that food exchange develops and builds bonds of solidarity and alliances at all levels. For example, long ago, in 1918, Simon Freud already told us that to eat and drink with someone was a symbol and a confirmation of social comfort and of the assumption of social obligation. This means that we don't just sit down with anybody to eat. And if we come to sit with somebody or a group of people to eat, there's a reason for doing that. Also, back in 1925, this well-known French anthropologist, Marcel Mauss, argued that along similar lines. And he said, well, I'm quoting here, he said, man, we should be something like humans or people in general. But excuse me, but I'm just citing the way he wrote. Man doesn't eat with enemies, and eat together and eating together is a clear sign of kinship, trust, friendship, and in some way, in some cultures, or even of sexual intimacy. So there are reasons attached to eating food with other peoples. Thus, from these few ideas provided here, it's clear that what we can learn from scholarly research, that humans eat together for several reasons. We don't just invite anybody to sit around next to us to eat. And I think the idea of there's no such a thing as free lunch comes from here. There's a reason attached to the invited free lunch, invited free coffee, or anything. And when we come together with other human beings familiar to us, we do that because we trust those human beings. We regard them friends or family members or somebody like us, with whom we have many things that we share. Somebody unknown or somebody unfamiliar, we are not comfortable to eat with them because we don't know who they are, we don't know how they eat, we don't know who they are at the end. Consequently, trust is very, very important to sit around the same table or perhaps to eat in the same room. So in addition of being an important subsistence resource, food allows us plays other important roles. Indeed, food is an instrument that allows us to establish social alliances and thus play a crucial role in the accomplishment of our political ambitions. Politicians do this very well in our times. Election time, sometimes in some places, politicians provide food, free food, for reason. And that's a strategy, because to anybody who provides us with free food, we have something to repay. And in this case, our support is one way to pay for the free lunch we receive from them. So building upon this, a few ideas provided here, I would like to expand the idea of using food to fulfill political ambitions, specifically addressing the case of the Inca Empire. And this is the issue that I have been working in the last times. And before, for some particular reason, I didn't pay much attention to the Inca state, but lately I realized that maybe I should learn more about the Inca state as well. So, in 1532, the Inca state was the single largest empire ever established in America. No other state was as large as the Inca. As you can see in the map, that was the extent of the Inca Empire, very much covering the entire Western South America. From Cusco, its capital, the Inca state expanded and annexed a multitude of nations who were different, of different size and complexity, inhabited different geographic settings, and were culturally and linguistically diverse. Some of these nations were conquered by means of force, militarily, where many others were annexed peacefully by diplomacy. So these two researchers, Craig Morris and John Mura, argued some time ago that to administer a massive territory occupied by an assembly of nations so diverse in every meaning possible must have been one of the greatest challenges the Inca state ever faced. Just imagine people speaking different languages from you with different costumes, different values, politically organized in many different ways, were eventually administered by the Inca state. So the question is, how did the Inca administer millions of people who were so diverse? Millions of people who, many of them, prepared to fight back the Incas in order to regain their autonomy. The answer, in part, may be the ones I will provide you here. The Incas, along this large territory, provided many centers that are recognized as Inca provincial centers, and all of them regarded as Inca provincial capitals were linked by a network of roads, communication, and everything was flowing from one city to another, and all of them linked to Cusco. This was just like the Roman Empire. Every single road leads to Rome in Europe, in the Americas, in South America. Every single road led to Cusco. So the site where I work is Tambo Viejo, as you can see here in the map on the left side. And this other map is the south coast, and those little triangles are the Inca sites established in the region. And this is Tambo Viejo. Most Inca sites, if not all, were built this way, often with a large plaza. And so Tambo Viejo is not exception. Large plaza was strategically built that way so that tons of people, hundreds, if not thousands, will blow together there for special occasions organized by the state. Research I have been carrying out at this site has found, among others, evidence of food production, cooking food actually. Here on the left, we have an oven built to prepare food. Next to the oven, you can see a ceramic pot that might have been perhaps contained beverages, alcohol, called chicha in the region. Inside the oven and around the oven, we found tons of food remains. And you can see here in the middle, those are partially burned sweet potatoes that somehow escaped from the plate of the people. Below you see some bones of camelettes, also here camelet bones, partially burned, indicating that this here food was cooked in some kind of oven. That kind of oven must have been this one. The evidence which I just show you briefly very much is represented this way. Here you have a pile of rocks. You heat the rocks for 1 hour until they're very, very hot. Once they're hot, you put food underneath and cover with the food with hot rock. Eventually cover more and then put plant remains there to cover. And on top of that, you place dirt. You leave like that for about 1 hour. An hour later, you come back, you open the oven, and you find cooked food. This is the easiest way to cook food in large volume to feed massive number of people in the hundreds. And this is what the Inca did in the provinces. In addition to the evidence I have found recently, many of the archaeologists have found similar evidence elsewhere, showing that the Incas used this strategy to local conquered peoples to make peace. Spaniards, such as Cesar de Leon, point out about these practices. It is said that in Cusco and beyond Cusco, the Incas organized these kind of rituals where they brought all kind of food and delivered that to everybody who came there, to the guests, who ate and drank until they were very drunk. And all of these were provided by the state, by the Inca. And with this, the Inca showed they're very generous. They were very powerful. They could do anything that others could not just even think about it. Another Spaniard, Juan de Betanzos, argued along similar lines. He showed that he tells us again that the people came dressed up, just like in our times, to eat on everything provided by the state. And this was a special occasion where people ate lots of things, especially meat provided by the state and alcohol provided by the state. Just imagine you and I and all of us here in Canada and elsewhere, if the head of our states, like Trudeau in Canada, would come delivering food and alcohol to all of us, we would show them our love. And the Incas did that. So centers like Tambo Viejo, the site where I'm working in Peru, were places where the Incas organized these kind of festivals, food festivals, to deliver to the local people. With this, after eating from the state, the local people became in debt with the Incas because they could not fight back to the Incas. The Incas became their friends. And this is how the Incas established reciprocal obligations, mutual friendship within themselves and the local people, local conquered peoples, who again could not attempt even throwing a rock to the Incas because they realized the Incas were good people, their friends, and it was okay for them to be there. It was okay for them to be their masters. And this was the strategy employed by the Incas to administer this large territory occupied by millions of people who were culturally and linguistically diverse. This kind of food today is called pachamanca in Peru. And so pachamanca, from these findings, we are learning that pachamanca is a very old way of preparing food for special occasions, something the Incas already did, and people in our time continue doing it. So by these things and other activities like ritual offerings paid by the Incas to local shrines, local gods, Incas incorporated local people, established peace with the local peoples, and local peoples were unable again to fight back the Incas and accepting eventually as their masters. So this was a strategy employed by the Incas. So the food at the end of everything was the main resource that allowed the Incas to build peace with the conquered peoples, who again, otherwise, might have been ready to fight back and perhaps even destroy the Inca Empire. So those are the few ideas I put together for you. I know my time is limited, but if you have questions, please let me know. There is much to talk about this. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, we will keep questions to the very end. And I would like to ask Charlie to set up her presentation. So if Lydia, if you could stop sharing your screen, please. Dr. Charlie Spring joined us from the UK as a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Geography here at the University of Calgary as well. She's actually working with me, and she is currently exploring intersections of housing and food insecurity. And she will talk about food sharing as an everyday radical act. So
Great, thank you everyone. Thank you, Chelsea, and for the introductory speakers also for situating those of us who are residing on this colonized land of Calgary. And thanks to Professor Valdez for eloquently laying out some of the themes that I hope will resonate with my talk. And thanks to everyone for listening. So I'm also going to be talking about food sharing. Okay. So food sharing is one of those terms that gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling, and it's something deeply rooted in our evolution, but it's also something that's easily co-opted, just as we've seen with the so-called sharing economy that you might also call platform capitalism. That is the commodification of sharing. So today I'm going to share some of my thinking and my research into distinct forms of surplus food redistribution as a form of sharing food, and the potential for those forms to manage or to contest the problems of food waste and food insecurity. Okay, so now it's not letting me move between, here we go. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to share some theoretical insights that I find useful and consider some of the places that I did my research, mainly in the UK where I'm from. And I'll finish by drawing out some key themes that I think characterize some of the differences between food redistribution as charity versus food redistribution as mutual aid. And I hope that it will include some insights, both for those of us that are more academically minded, those of us that are more practically minded, and those of us that are a bit of both. Okay. So on the left is a picture of the contents of my first ever dumpster dive in 2011. I noticed an overflowing waste bin at a service station, and something told me to grab the food, take it home, take a picture, and from then on, I was pretty obsessed with trying to understand how that food had ended up being thrown away. I also felt pretty compelled to share that food, and I wasn't really sure how to do that, which I'll return to later. I'd recently read Raj Patel's book, Stuffed and Starved, which really stoked my interest in the connections between food systems and inequality. Patel grapples with the contradictions of food system outcomes, such that a single person can be at once obese, malnourished, and hungry. The image on the right is problematically simplistic, but it symbolizes for me the idea of the hunger waste paradox, a world characterized by unevenly distributed scarcity and excess. And this is what I ended up writing my PhD about. So I'm going to share first a few theoretical insights that I've picked up over the years before sharing my examples. So food waste is often represented as an unfortunate side effect of industrial food systems due to expiry dates or damage during transit or people not caring enough about food. But what this narrative obscures is the way that wastage is a core component of profitability. John Cloke's concept of vastogenesis suggests that waste making is part of the speeding up of the flow of material for mass consumption. And it's the way for transnational corporations in particular to control the availability and price of food through overproduction. Alex Barnard, who wanted this book to be called Waving the Banana at Capitalism, uses ideas from Marx and Polanyi to suggest that in a capitalist and competitive retail system, an item that can't be profitably sold might be worth more once it's thrown away. That is, it may retain its use value and its capacity to nourish a human body, but once its exchange value has elapsed, it will be ex-commodified. But it's quite hard to argue with the idea that if you have food waste alongside food insecurity, the obvious solution is to give the surplus food to the hungry people. And Sabrina Arcuri has explored this using the idea of a consensus frame. She bases her ideas on Italy's food waste donation law to argue that surplus food redistribution has constituted a consensus that draws together people with very different political tendencies and different activities. This consensus can maybe be seen in the global growth of US-style food banking, seen in this map by the Global Food Banking Network. Food banking has grown as a way to manage excess food and growing levels of urban poverty by diverting donated food through charities. But Sabrina Arcuri points out that within this consensus, some organizations frame redistribution in what she calls a flat key. That's to say they see food charity as an efficient way to treat food system symptoms like waste and hunger. Other organizations play redistribution in a sharper key, emphasizing the limitations of redistribution and arguing that you can't solve waste and hunger without contesting the systems that produce them. And this distinction between the flat and sharp key isn't meant to impose a dichotomy, but to highlight the way that different political and economic agendas sometimes coalesce around this seemingly similar practice of redistributing surplus food. The geographer Nick Hainan compares food banks with the activist network Food Not Bombs in his 2010 paper. He argues that food banks operate a logic of containment, that they keep people just about fed, but in a way that works in direct collaboration with what he calls the neoliberal project of regulating the poor. On the other hand, meals made from wasted food and served by Food Not Bombs, he argues, contest both wastage and urban inequality by sharing food in acts of solidarity and engaging in political activism against the systems that cause the hunger waste paradox. And another common way to understand this is to differentiate between charity and mutual aid. So mutual aid attempts to meet people's basic survival needs, but always with a critique and a view to protesting unjust systems. And just before I turn to my own examples, I want to note that reality is always more complex than our conceptual frameworks. Many charity providers are very aware of the shortcomings of food banking and even engage in advocacy and services that go beyond just providing food. Charitable food assistance takes many forms and is often deeply linked with government, industry, and civil society. So I don't mean for you to look too closely at this figure, but it just hints at some of the complexity of the sectors and actors involved. There's a big literature around food assistance, particularly in North America, where it's grown over the past 4 decades. But some scholars have tried to capture this complexity by using insights that NGOs act as translation mechanisms for broader shifts in policy, seeing food assistance as forms of collaborative or networked governance. Okay, so here are some pictures from my PhD research. The research aimed to compare UK models of surplus food redistribution, which was rapidly growing at the time. My background in anthropology made it obvious for me to use ethnography as my approach to the research. Others have called ethnography deep hanging out. So I spent a lot of time in warehouses and kitchens, digging through waste, sorting waste, preparing, serving food, and so on. And I became really interested in not just the kind of official politics and discourses that played out in these spaces, but also in the infrastructures and the materials and the aesthetics and the emotions that I experienced. And I became really interested in ideas of viscerality and disgust and what separates food from waste. I wrote a paper about this, which I won't go into detail now, but I think that these micro matters are really important to our understandings of political change. So my first organization was FareShare, who operate a network of warehouses that distribute donations of wasted food from large corporate donors. They operate similarly to US-style food banks, and they're part of the Global Food Banking Network. As a volunteer and researcher in the Manchester warehouse, I often witnessed corporate volunteers come and be told the kind of flat key narrative of food waste, that it's just an accident of industry and these volunteers are enacting a humanitarian good, which Jan Poppendieck has described as the moral safety valve, which allows well-intentioned citizens to relieve the discomfort of living in highly unequal societies through acts of charity. FareShare doesn't campaign around the causes of waste or of food insecurity, but it does lobby the UK government to support food businesses to donate their surplus. So arguably, FareShare plays surplus food redistribution in this flat key. And I mentioned my dumpster dive and wanting to know what to do with the food I found. It turns out that other people in the UK were thinking the same thing. And a group of chefs and students from Leeds, they started the Real Junk Food Project, which set up cafes to serve meals from wasted food. Meals were served on a pay-as-you-feel basis, with the idea that food should be available to anyone who wants or needs it, regardless of their income or other conditionalities that usually determine people's access to social welfare and benefits. They thus aimed to avoid what they saw as the pitfalls of charity, and they spent a lot of time calling out major retailers who they felt were responsible for such large amounts of wasted food. And they used that word wasted instead of surplus to highlight that waste isn't an accident, but it's something that implies some kind of agency. Their approach then arguably played the sharper key of systemic critique, aiming to emphasize the use values of food over its exchange values. So food is something that nourishes rather than just generates profits. Okay, I don't have much time to go into detail about this, but I did receive a grant during my PhD to spend a couple of months in the US and Canada, looking at examples of not just food banking, but mutual aid that we could learn from in the UK. And during that time, I interviewed a former San Francisco digger who told me about free meals in parks that they'd served in the 60s. And she also told me about the Black Panthers free breakfast program, which aimed to give food to kids who'd been left outside of racist welfare systems. I spent a day gardening with this guy Tree in the middle, who ran a free farm stand and believed that everyone should have access to delicious homegrown produce without having to pay at all. And I also met Freedom 90, the self-declared union of food bank volunteers in Ontario, who were fed up of using their unpaid labour to fill in gaps left by welfare retrenchment. And these groups and approaches just form a diverse and ongoing history of contesting unjust food systems and short-term charity solutions. Okay, so I'm going to just name a few themes that I think characterize more radical forms of food sharing. The first is commensality, which broadly means eating together. Sharing food is something that defines humans. It's also etymologically woven into words like companion, meaning someone with whom you break bread. The photo is of a group called Community Kitchen, or Commie Kitch as they called themselves, who turned donated food into meals for unhoused residents in New Orleans. We cooked together and then we ate together with the people who showed up for the meal. And I just sat in the park for hours talking to veterans who'd become homeless, but were also looking after children or creating art. And I think that the ethos of care and welcome reduced the sense of them versus us that you sometimes see in food assistance spaces, and created an atmosphere of sharing not only food, but also stories. And maybe that's where democracy starts. The second theme is one of identity and aesthetics that potentially make more contestatory spaces seem exclusive. David Giles, this is him in the picture, has written about the crust punk atmospheres of Food Not Bombs kitchens that he visited around the world. And some of the Real Junk Food Project groups that I visited, they were making a conscious effort to make their spaces feel less activisty, because they wanted to make their critiques of food waste available to a really broad audience. Some people also felt uncomfortable with the idea of paying as they felt. You know, in a world where access to food is defined by prices and incomes, the market can potentially flatten other kinds of difference. And as Patricia Allen pointed out, ironically, it's the industrialized food system that has reduced class differences in food consumption. And it's the corporate co-optation of things like organic food that have reinstated certain distinctions. I think issues of taste, class, and aesthetics are really vital for us to consider if we're imagining a world based on sharing. I think it's quite telling that as a middle-class white girl, I sometimes felt more comfortable in the more self-defined activist spaces of my research than I did in the warehouses of Fair Share, where there were a lot of volunteers who were men on welfare to work schemes who would tease me for taking home leftover lettuces at the end of the day rather than meat. And what we choose to eat and what we choose to feed to others and share with others, I think says a lot about what we think about ourselves and about others. Okay, so politicization. I think this links to the overall argument about how different forms of food redistribution may serve to contain or to contest the root causes of waste and hunger. Some food banking organizations have made steps to engage in advocacy, but a lot stop short at criticizing what Andy Fisher has called the hunger industrial complex. For example, few food banks have pressured donor companies to pay adequate wages. The COVID-19 pandemic has shone a light on the precarity of many, and some more progressive food bank workers are really raising questions about systemic racism, about land reform and income redistribution. As Cornell West reminds us, hegemonic formations contain within them the seeds of their own demise. So I think we need to seek to form alliances across institutional boundaries so that organizations like food banks can perhaps not be abolished, but retooled as nodes in more universal and dignified food provisioning systems based on agroecology, as has been attempted in Brazil and is closer to what Ruth Gilmore describes as abolition. Okay. And just to finish, because I know I'm going over time. So with that lofty vision, another of my favorite etymological insights is the word radical, which is literally rooted in the idea of roots. It's easy enough to say that we need to address the root causes of social problems, but as the past year has shown, humans often misdiagnose what those roots are. We need to name what we mean by systemic and structural causes of food waste, food insecurity, and other related problems. I think 2020 has also encouraged many of us to think more deeply about what it means to care for ourselves and for others, and what it means to commodify things like care, hospitality, and sharing. You know, we've also seen a sort of mainstreaming of mutual aid, which I think should alert people not just to help, but also to consider why their neighbors were so precarious in the first place. And just to finish, doing ethnography in redistribution spaces frequently threw my assumptions and my conceptual frameworks into disarray, but it did frequently also remind me that food sharing is everywhere, from the snacks that we share with friends and colleagues to well-intentioned food drives by corporate employees, but also that good intentions can often be co-opted for the profit of the few. I think the seeds of what José Vivero-Paul describes as a food commons lie perhaps in our attention to food spaces where bodies, emotions, pleasure, senses, and relationships evade commodification. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much, Charlie. That's definitely a lot of food for thought, as the saying goes. And while our next speaker is setting up, Simon Koots, I just want to remind people that we will take questions at the very end. So please remember your questions, or if you like, you can already start posting them in the chat, and I will try my best to keep track of them. So our third speaker in this session is Simon Koots. And he is a master's student in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology. So you see a lot of anthropology in this panel here at the University of Calgary. And his research focuses on the relationship between farming and climate change, primarily through trying to understand farmers' perception of the climate crisis and its accompanying risk. So the floor is yours, Simon.
All right, thank you, Marit. Thanks to everyone so far who's presented. It's been awesome listening to all the talks so far. So as Marit said, all my research focuses on kind of climate change perceptions among farmers, but when dealing with farmers, they're kind of, the start of the food system, the food producers. And it's these producers who I've been talking to, who I kind of come across a lot of issues within the food system that I think are really important to think about when we're talking about tackling the climate crisis. So I'm going to start off by kind of giving some context about the situation with agriculture in Alberta right now. And then I'll kind of come back to this question, title my talk later on, and kind discuss this a bit more in depth. So first of all, kind of how is Alberta's agriculture doing? This data I have right here, it's all from 2019. We see lots of money, billions of dollars in agri-food exports. A lot of this is canola, wheat, beef, and live cattle. Lots of farmland, second most farms in Canada. As far as the national herd for feeder cattle goes, 60% of it is in Alberta. About 40% of the total cattle stock is in Alberta as well. And as far as meat packing capacity goes, we have by far the most in Western Canada. So overall, the industry looks very healthy when you're looking at it at a very broad scale, especially towards kind of the export-oriented end of it. But this isn't the full story because obviously just seeing the total profits made from Alberta's agricultural industry as a whole, that doesn't reflect how the average farmer is doing. So when we're looking down to the kind of level of the farm household or the individual farmer, there's a lot more problems that kind of come up and that a lot of farmers are worried about. Some of these are rising equipment costs, new machinery, combines, tractors. These are now in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on the largest farms. And this is going up at a very, very fast rate over the last decade or two. Same with land. Land is becoming increasingly hard to afford. So new farmers are having a hard time coming in, and only the largest of farms and the richer and more successful farms are able to kind of buy out their other competitors. Farm prices in Alberta have gone up about 30% in the last decade alone. So land in a lot of the areas around kind of Edmonton and just north of there through West Loch and Athabasca in the Parkland area where land is very fertile, these areas land has become very expensive. Fertilizer use across the prairies is going up. And it's also becoming more expensive. So these are additional costs being imposed upon farmers who are trying to make a living. And cost of grains are going up over time as farmers become more reliant on deals with companies like Monsanto for the Roundup Ready crops and their new variants of corn and such. So what does this kind of all mean for farmers? Well, this graph here, it's the data is Canada-wide, but this is a reflection of what's happening in Alberta as well, where the gray on the top, the gross farm revenue, is climbing up over the decades quite high, where the realized net farm income of farmers has remained quite low. So even though farmers or the farm industry is making more and more money, the average farm household is actually not really any better off than it was before. If you take the $670 or so million in net profits made across Alberta last year and you divide it up by the 40,000 farm households, they're only making out $16,500 per farm in Alberta. Obviously, a farm with 10,000 acres is going to be making significantly more than smaller farms under 1,000 acres. And these big farms are quite successful, often making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. But the average farm in Alberta is only 1,200 acres, and 60% of farmers in Alberta are farming under 1,000. So for a lot of farmers, these low numbers in net income, this is more of a reality for them. So with on-farm income so low, on this little pie chart here, it's the green section, it's 21%. So 56% of the average income of a farm household now in Alberta is coming from off-farm employment. This is highest in Canada. It's partially reflected by the good opportunities, obviously not right now, but in past years in oil and gas, where they can do good seasonal work, short contracts, high wages, and then still own a farm and operate a farm other parts of the year. But this is also a lot of people find work in the city or in other opportunities because, if for a farm household making $10,000 to $20,000 a year, that's not enough to raise a family on. It's not enough to pursue the opportunities that you want to pursue. So off-farm income, and increasingly with the aging population, investment income and pensions, these are becoming more and more important over the years. I have a quote here from a farmer from Athabasca who says, "We would not have made it without off-farm income. For the first 20 years, we were not profitable. We needed off-farm income to survive." So they put it bluntly, saying that, for the 20 years of paying off the price of land, paying off their debts, you can't just go into the farming community and start farming and just farm to pay off your debts. A lot of the time, you need another source of income to make that dream a reality. Now, with all these kind of increasing costs and all these problems imposed on farmers, one kind of issue that's been talked about in academia, at least, is the increasing size of the average farm. in Alberta. So farm sizes are getting bigger as other farmers retire, younger people are less willing to get into farming nowadays. And larger farms do have larger net profits, but put into question here is how efficient are these farms economically on a per acre basis? On the left side here, I have cattle farms. On the right side, Alberta grain and oil seed farms. And I want you to just pay attention to the gray line at the bottom. This is going smaller farms on the left to bigger farms on the right. And it's showing that net profits don't go up as farms get bigger. In fact, with cattle farms, you see a downward trend to worse economic efficiency among larger farms. So the case for kind of economies of scale and having fewer farmers farm more land as a more efficient idea, there's kind of not a super good argument for that, but there are some arguments against it, which I'll get into now, and which kind of touch on these themes of climate change and food security in Canada. So larger farms are generally more export focused. They're farming crops like canola, they're farming a lot of wheat, a lot of large cattle ranches. And these are the crops I talked about at the beginning that are, they're exporting billions of dollars worth to the rest of the world, lots of it to the United States, to China, to Mexico. But it's these crops and these larger farms, when, the additional transport cost of shipping your food around the world rather than producing locally, this is where we're burning fossil fuels and releasing more greenhouse gases. And transportation is a huge part and a huge problem of the current climate crisis. Additionally, if you go to the grocery store, I think some presenters touched on this earlier, but you see a lot of produce that we're bringing in from places like California, from Ontario, from Mexico. Why is it that our produce is being imported and all of our food is being exported? Why is it that we can't produce a lot of the food that we eat here in Alberta? Some farmers have brought up this kind of idea of the subsidized farmer, how it's a myth. And the farmers that talk about this myth are often farming kind of at the lower end of acres, under 1,000, maybe 500 or 600. And these farmers, they say they haven't got a penny from the government. Whereas when talking to farmers who farm thousands of acres, oftentimes they'll talk about, the subsidy they got to get a new grain dryer or a new tractor or combine. So it appears that a lot of these policies and subsidies are kind of pushing farms towards the big end, and they're encouraging farmers to farm more land, and they're definitely not helping the smaller farmer out. Just going to go over this one briefly, but a lot of emissions from agriculture come from methane from cows and nitrous oxide from nitrogen fertilizer. So this graph here, the middle bar, the light blue, that's nitrous oxide. And this kind of growth in that, this is from 1990 to 2009, and it has grown even more since then. But across Canada, nitrous oxide use is growing, and this is pushed by far the fastest by growth in the prairies of use of nitrogen fertilizer, which emits nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas that's more potent and more damaging than carbon dioxide. And I think of the amount more used, it's all gone up about 40 to 50% since the early 1990s in total. So it's growing at a fast rate, even though our farmland at total area is not going up. And then finally, something that a lot of farmers who farm kind of under 1,000 acres are concerned about is that they see all the larger farms trying to maximize profits in a very capitalist, industrial, agricultural system. They're chopping out every single tree. They're worried about the local habitat of other animals, the local ecosystem. They're worried about diversity. So one farmer says that the neighbor, he just liked to chop trees. His grandson said he only retired because he had no more trees to chop down. Another farmer says, I used to see a lot of trees from my window, but a lot of those trees have disappeared the last few years. The land has been cleared, and this is not good land. This is PD land that should not be cleared. So a lot of them they're concerned about the trees being cut down by their neighbors, and they don't understand why, because it doesn't seem economically feasible. And even just yesterday, in a conversation with a farmer who farms just shy of 5,000 acres in Westlaw County, he was discussing how he cleared hundreds of acres of woodland. I was asking him about kind of the economic viability to do this, like what's the return? And he says it's half the time it pays off, but half the time that land he can't get tractors in, it's too wet, it's too peaty, it's too swampy. There's many reasons that this land probably shouldn't have been cleared in the first place. And it's the attention to detail of each acre that having more farmers on the land offers an advantage to make the land more productive, to make it more adaptable, more resilient. So having less people farming the land, maybe the net profits per individual are higher, but the actual attention paid to each individual acre goes down very quickly. And this is a problem when looking at the future of the Canadian or the Alberta food system. So kind of circling back to the first question asked at the beginning, is there a way that we can kind of protect farmers, protect their livelihoods, ease them of kind of the economic stress that we're going through, and also protect them from the future of climate change, since farmers are so dependent on weather patterns? Obviously, they're kind of be on the front lines of this fight. And yet at the same time, can we do this while still responsibly lowering greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, which contributes about 8 to 10% of emissions in Canada and Alberta? So obviously, as a master's student in anthropology, I have no big answer to this, but I think there's some lessons we can learn from the farmers we talk to and the discussions we have about kind of ways we can frame this discussion, and important parts that maybe are overlooked a lot of time when we're talking about a just food system. So first of all, the frame that we put it in, are we talking about the risk of an individual farmer's farm or at a global scale? Because oftentimes globally people say, oh, Alberta might benefit from climate change because you can now grow corn and other crops, whereas they're not thinking about the future of maybe the risk of flood or drought, or what happens when even Alberta becomes more arid, especially the southern part. So kind of framing climate change in a risk or in a way that makes sense to individual farmers and kind of puts the risk on what might cost their farm in the future, that's an important way to put it. Also, climate change has become political, especially here in North America, with the presence of oil and gas. There's a lot of talk in media and politics about the trade-off the economy and the environment. There might be some arguments made to how there is this kind of trade-off in something like the oil and gas industry. I don't believe that there has to be this trade-off in something like agriculture. So having this kind of climate skepticism and denial and kind of leaking in from other industries into agriculture, I think it's dangerous. So it's important that we work to push back on this. And finally, a lot of the policies that encourage younger farmers to come into farming or to stay in farming, and for more people to be farming less land, these are obviously, there's lots of benefits here for food security, for adaptability and resilience, for lower greenhouse gas emissions. And these policies are supported by both farmers farming small plots of land and larger farmers who understand that competition in a capitalist farming area is very, very important. And finally, just my last point is, we're looking to tackle climate change as a province and as a nation. And I think it's important that we don't really leave anyone behind. Having smaller farmers on the land and having more farmers on the land, this is one way that we can really protect Canadian food security, lower emissions from the agricultural sector. The only issue here is that those smallest farmers financially, they're struggling. So I think it's important that we start changing the way that government policy and citizens groups and farming organizations approach this issue. And if we want to see, the future of Alberta agriculture kind of come out in a positive way, it's important we start pushing for the policies and subsidies that we think will set us up in the best possible way for the future. Thank you. And I think now we can go to questions for all three of us.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Very important insights and questions that you raised.
So I hope everyone's had a good lunch. Being European, I always feel like lunch should take longer than half an hour. So I've just been wolfing down mine, but welcome back. And thanks for being here. And we've got 3 great presentations coming up for you on the theme of food and social change. So I will give a 5-minute and a 1-minute warning to all the presenters in the chat. So keep an eye out for that if you're able to see the chat while you're presenting, but please try to keep within your 15 minutes so that we've got enough time for questions at the end. Thank you. Okay, and now I'll introduce Bula Wayessa, who's from the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Minnesota. Thank you very much, Bula.
So today I'm going to talk about globalization of teff and its impact in Ethiopia. Teff, one of the important cereal grain native to Ethiopia, and that has been being cultivated for at least the last 2,000 years. And these days becoming one of the very important cereal grain for food, not only in Ethiopia, but at the global level, and it's becoming the next superfood because of its mineral and nutrient ingredients. So teff in Ethiopia is basically cultivated by smallholders across the country, and no such due attention is given regarding mechanization of teff production. As you can see from this image, it is being cultivated by farmers practicing plowing. On the right side of the picture, you see another cereal grain is wheat, whereby it's highly mechanized, and the researchers are investing a lot of money in improving the seed and to bring about massive production. But it appears that teff is not receiving due attention from the government, and its production is declining in Ethiopia. At the same time, it is being globalized. So there are two contradicting things at this point. One, teff is being globalized, and in Ethiopia, the production is declining. So in the country, the teff production, teff cultivation and consumption are affected by interrelated factors. One, globalization, the globalization of the crop. And second, as I said, decline of teff production, especially in Ethiopia. And there is a tendency which smallholders are shifting to cultivation of other crops than relying on teff because of factors that we are going to see. The globalization of teff is because of the growing Ethiopian Eritrean community all over the world, of course, in North America and Europe. And these people are, of course, importing teff from Ethiopia, and that is the basic food on which we rely even on a daily basis. So there is a kind of massive importing, teff being export to different parts of the world, especially North America and Europe, as I said, because of the diaspora community. And again, it is getting great interest among other communities. For example, we see in different organic food grocery where teff is packed and being sold. And it's of course becoming very important. At the same time, as I said, the production in the country is declining. So globalization, because of it, is increasing demand all over the world, and again, because of the ever-increasing Ethiopian and Eritrean diaspora community who rely on teff for bread. The decline for the teff production in Ethiopia, one, because of course, widespread teff fungus that destroys the crop in the field. At the same time, there is a termite which associated with the climate change. These are especially affecting teff production in the southern parts of Ethiopia. And it's really, the production is declining, and there is a tendency with peasants shifting to the cultivation of maize. Second, widespread land lease, especially rural land lease in Ethiopia. That land lease could be because of urban expansion, as you can see from this image, where former land being used by the smallholder to cultivate teff completely overtaken by high-rises, building, apartment building. This is around the city of Addis Ababa. Not only the city expansion of city, but again, there are companies, international companies engaging in the cultivation of different cereal crops, especially wheat and rice in the country. And the land that could be used for the teff cultivation being used for other cereals. But these are rice and the wheat are not this much important, even if it is very important cereal grain. But when you compare with teff, of course, the cultural value is extremely low. So teff cultivation is rapidly declining because of the decline in production, which has got something to do with climate and, of course, lack of attention, especially when it comes to widespread rural land lease. In the southern part of the country, especially where it is wetter, farmers are especially giving attention to maize cultivation. Maize has advantage because farmers can get access to quality seed. And because they have access to quality seed, they sometimes prefer cultivation of maize instead of cultivating teff, because teff is so expensive, and there is a chance to lose the crop in the field, and losing the crop in the field means, of course, great financial crisis or crisis for the peasant. So the peasant calculate the gain and, of course, the pressure behind the investment, the attention of the government and the international organization. So there is a tendency for the farmers to shift to the cultivation of other crops, including maize. So because of the globalization of teff, we can see how much the price is, of course, is skyrocketing. Of course, the slide is, I don't know if you can see the other part of the slide, it's being covered on my slide. So a kilo of teff is almost 40 Ethiopian birr. When you compare with other crops, of course, there is a big difference. Why teff is becoming important, why it is, of course, the price is increasing this much, of course, because of, as I said, because of globalization, and of course, because the cereal is becoming a commodity. So, so many Ethiopians, middle class, even I can say, beginner or university professors cannot afford teff today in Ethiopia, because it is 1 quintal of teff is 4,000 Ethiopian birr. It is half of the monthly salary of a university professor, especially the beginner. So you can imagine how the price is.
Bula, you've just been muted. I don't know why. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Okay.
Sorry.
So the increment in the price of teff is resulting in, of course, I can say social crisis, where people start to get divided based on bread. The community who have got a better economic status still can have access to teff, where a majority of the people who are poor enough, of course, middle class, of course, start to rely on other crops. So a kind of startup formation, bread eating community, some based on bread, teff bread, some other on any other crop, and some other, of course, mixing teff, flour with other cereal to make a bread. So there is a clear development of social change in terms of bread eating lifestyle. So teff bread is becoming really inaccessible for poor. I cannot say only the poor, as I said, even beginners, especially university professors, don't have access, because at least they are not going to rely only on bread. They need the stews, they need to rent house, and so on and so forth. So I can say it is really becoming not accessible. So the average teff price, as I said, is $4,000 birr, which means $133. So if you compare this with the per capita income of Ethiopia, it's of course 65.8 monthly. So you can imagine how many of the Ethiopian community can access this grain. So they start to rely on other grain, as I mentioned, including wheat, sorghum, and especially maize. Even if there are so many disadvantages with the globalization of teff, the globalization of teff brought about another advantage for Ethiopia. As you all know, Ethiopia most of the time associated with hunger, dry. Actually, Ethiopia knows this much dry, but the perception is there. But the globalization of teff is, of course, affecting popular perception about the country. So Ethiopia is contributing one wonderful cereal grain to the world. And this perception is changing, of course, very well. I carried out a kind of interview among my former university students, SUNY Newport, and majority of the students I asked know Ethiopia very well by athletics, the fossil of Lucy, and injera is coming the third stage, or taking the third stage. Injera means a bread of teff. So teff is influencing how people perceive about Ethiopia, or popular perception about the country. So the globalization has got advantage in terms of fighting against wrong perception about the community. But again, it has got great disadvantage because it divided society depending upon their wealth. So in general, the globalization contributing to the skyrocketing the price of teff in Ethiopia, that's obvious, because it's being controlled by some companies. For example, some of the company pack and distribute the teff flour in different stores as organic or whatever. And even some of them not controlled by Ethiopia. Some years ago, a Dutch company claimed that he converted a teff flour and he managed to have patent right on that and control the patent right and the distribution of teff all over the world. How did he claim? He argues that he managed to convert teff into flour so that people can make bread. Imagine that Ethiopians were making bread out of teff for the last 2,000 years. Of course, the battle is still there, and Ethiopia is not retaining full patent right of teff production. Still, it is being at the court, and Ethiopia is fighting, even if it has lost the first battle. So the rise in the price is affecting social gathering. Why? Because you exclude yourself. If you are not inviting people to come to your home to eat teff bread, you feel ashamed because it's a tradition. So what you do is that you avoid inviting. You avoid inviting, or you avoid yourself from involving in. So there is a clear social class. And this in long term is affecting how the people interact. So in this case, Ethiopian diaspora community are playing vital role because they have got some money to send to Ethiopia and their family members can buy teff. And now one can recognize who has a family member abroad, depending upon even the availability of teff bread at home. As I said, so teff is being globalized and it's becoming commodity. And so many Ethiopians are losing access, but at the same time, as I said, it has got value when it comes to Ethiopia's dignity, fighting about the wrong perception, prevailing about the country, the hunger, the war. Unfortunately, still today, Ethiopia is at war. Of course, I cannot eliminate that one. So still, there are hope, and the teff is being used, and in short, Ethiopia's major contribution to the world is becoming teff, especially after coffee Arabica.
Thank you so much, Bula, and thank you for keeping perfectly in time. That made me realize that I've eaten teff in 4 countries and 3 continents, so I'm definitely part of that globalization. If people would like to save their questions for Bula for after the 3 presentations or put them in the chat, that would be fine. Thank you, Bula. If you would like to stop sharing your screen, and we'll move on to our own Chelsea Klinke and Gertrude Samar, who are a PhD and MA student, respectively, in anthropology at the University of Calgary. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. For our presentation today, we want to tell a story of our collaboration, a story of our co-production, a story of friendship, and what this project is all about. This story began in 2019 when we were both admitted at the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology under the supervision of Dr. Ben McKay. 2 months down the line, we were supposed to assist him with organizing a workshop on agrarian extractivism in Latin America. It was during this time that we engaged with several literature on industrial agriculture. And we met some wonderful people along those lines. And these people were people who have written extensively on political economies and political ecology. So we got to interact with them, and then we learned a lot from them. We are both working towards our fieldwork on alternatives to the current agrarian regime. And then months after the workshop, we put our stuff together, getting ready to go to our field for our field work. But unfortunately, this couldn't happen. Chelsea was supposed to go to the Bolivian Andes to examine the dynamics of llama pastoralists. And I was supposed to go to Ghana to look at the implications of large-scale land acquisitions. So when it became very obvious that we were unable to go to our field sites, we attuned our lenses to our environment around us, which is locally, and then we decided to do what we loved most, which was farming. Now, we both enrolled in the Faculty of Graduate Studies Transformative Talent Internship Program as interns for Grow Calgary. And Grow Calgary is a not-for-profit agency, an urban farm that donates 100% of its produce to food access agencies and also relies on donations from individuals, companies, and then volunteers. So the first day we went to the farm, you could see there was nothing there. And then we were supposed to help build this farm. According to Statistics Canada, over 80,000 Calgarians are classified as moderately to severely food insecure. So doing this, we felt we were doing it in we were pursuing the right direction. Together with hands-on farming, we served as the executive director, which was Chelsea. And she was responsible for 40 coordinators in 16 departments and then 500 hands-on volunteers on the farm. And myself as the liaison between a community coordinator, outreach coordinator. So I was liaising between Grow Calgary and then 21 food access agencies, including In From the Cold, the Master Seed, Calgary Women Emergency Shelter, the Dream Center, and among others. Whilst doing this, when the produce was ready and then we were delivering our produce to these food access agencies, there was one thing that kept coming back to us, the fact that we felt fulfilled and that we believed that we were doing a good thing for a good cause.
So thank you, Gertrude, for that beautiful introduction to our journey and story and situating ourselves in our collaborative way. Now, something else that we really saw and were drawn towards was also our passion for pedagogy, so the teaching and learning of food and food studies. And we began noticing a bit throughout our own experiences and conversations with others that there was this gap in learning about the theoretical and conceptual frameworks of food studies, engaging in the literature, and then actually having hands-on experiences working at the community level. And so what our presentation and what we've been writing for several manuscripts about is this convergence of food scholarship and community-based participatory work to illuminate the need for and the opportunities of activist food scholarship. So one way in which we began to analyze our research question and put this question into praxis is developing an instruction across departments, so a little bit of cross-pollination of departments on the farm as well as off the farm. So off the farm, we really engaged in leadership and technical skills in regards to media and communication, newsletter and social media platforms, materials procurement, among many others. And then on the farm, we actually developed a multi-level free and flexible certificate program called the Small Scale Agricultural Farm Management Certificate, mouthful, wherein participants could accrue 50 hours at their own pace, working towards different learning outcomes. And so on the right, you can see here, we had actually a total of 70 different outcomes that were categorized into 10 themes, including farm design, agroecology, crop care, management and safety, among many others. And then within each category, we detailed specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals, or as you might colloquially know, SMART goals. And their learning outcomes were always tied to this larger, broader transformative agenda that Grow Calgary had of producing healthy food options to address food insecurity in Calgary, but through more ecologically sustainable modes of food production as well. So alongside members of our department, including Mary and Maddie, Bright, Kelsey, Zach, some of whom join us today, we really work towards understanding and applying these concepts of sustaining your soils and biosequestration, emphasizing earth care, people care, and future care through different synergetic approaches, but also really putting at the forefront that acknowledgement and recognition that many of these whole systems thinking approaches have deep, deep roots in Indigenous epistemologies and ways of knowing, being, connecting, and doing. So always paying homage to the land and working with the land as its caretakers of the water and soil, and really just guiding our relationship to helping plants grow in that framework as well. And so some of the different ways that we, stacked the patterns and resilient functions that you see in your natural ecosystem, we're using different adaptive and complementary techniques such as cover cropping and mulching, companion planting, chopping and dropping. So these are kind of more the how did we operationalize our learning targets in more sustainable ways that really centered caring for the health of the soil and all those microorganisms. So we also did this in a way using low impact local resources, such as compost through different household and business composting programs, minimizing those use of agrochemicals and GMO seeds, fertilizers through integrated pest management systems and natural fertilizers. We also reduced high impact technologies as well as energy intensive inputs by supporting more regenerative practices, as well as supporting a larger volunteer base. So farming in this way, again, going back to pedagogy and praxis, or the methods of our teaching, was an assets-based one, or really looking at what are the strengths of our volunteers and the learners, as well as the strengths and values within the natural ecosystem. And so just as an example, for instance, one of our volunteers on the right, she just had an avid love for organizing and doing, crafting databases, as well as learning, the different families of plants and seeds. And so she spearheaded our seed bank, which, was extremely helpful and relevant for the continuation of being able to grow season to season as we relied heavily on donated items. And so what we saw is that as opposed to conventional classroom-based learning, this kind of place-based learning really challenged us and other volunteers to understand what are these deeper layers of our physical environments, including the conditions and barriers for growing healthy and accessible food. And so our experience learning or interning with an urban farm, specifically as graduate students, really did highlight these existing opportunities for a paradigm shift within academia that could converge more of the theoretical food studies with action-based community work to support more sustainable local food systems, as well as build community. And that was really key during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say we're still close friends who chat every single day with 90% of the volunteers that were in our internship program, as well as, all the vitamin D that was really essential during the pandemic as well. And we found that it was really through this relationship building and engagement and means of collaboration, combined with knowledge mobilization through education, that we conclude that we can affect change and start to begin, challenging. It's one way in which to challenge the dominant food model, which really does marginalize many and leads to a lot of ecological destruction, whether that be deglaciation, desertification, you name it. And so although we do recognize and situate that our experience is a small initiative at the margins, it really can be reproduced within academia frameworks to bring more awareness about sustainable regenerative farming practices, including the diversification of your plants and species and supporting native pollinators, using lower impact technologies and renewable forms of energy in your food production model, choosing input and output choices that are reflecting your natural ecosystem, and then most importantly, engaging in holistic, inclusive social frameworks that strengthen your community ties and could lead to more increased access, security, and sovereignty over your food. So as you can see here on the right, we had a group of youth from the Katimavik program, and they were with us for several months, taking on leadership roles at their young age, both on and off the farm, and walking away with a lot of new experience, being able to lead and grow food as well. So drawing from our experience, Gertrude and I have actually gone on to support Calgary's wider agrarian network, including volunteering and apprenticing with different organizations such as Foodscape Calgary, which I included in the link during lunch, Permeate, Dirt Boys Urban Farming, Calgary Harvest, among many others. But this also really brought our attention to the underlying systemic barriers to local food resiliency, access, security, and sovereignty. And so this is kind of pointing towards some of the questions that Sarah Rodriguez, or registered today as Oscar Jara online, is looking at, not looking at these band-aids necessarily of food production or the role of social agencies and the roles of food banks, but really getting to more sustainable changes at the community level, while also addressing political reforms that are creating barriers to people being able to grow their own food or access nutritious food. And so one project that we're working on, maybe Sarah can speak to at a later time, is the Neighborhood Block Project. And within this initiative, it's really to build that leadership, organizational, and technical capacities within neighborhood blocks, specifically living in more lower income neighborhoods. So in Calgary, more of the Forest Lawn area, or Dover, to really come together and start dismantling that capitalist system little by little. It's always in stages, and with the support of policy reforms and wage gaps, through these more self-directed projects, so that there's less reliancy on social agencies and food banks and farms to provide food, but people can begin closing that loop and having a positive feedback loop within themselves, where they're being able and have the means to grow their produce and then sell it as well within their community. While still recognizing the good work that social agencies do provide, as well as food banks. So we're not completely ruling them out. They do serve a purpose for emergency food. More importantly, in our graduate work, we came to understand and demonstrate through this presentation even just the importance of the co-production of knowledge and the ways in which you can collaborate within academia, whether that be in food studies or other disciplines. So Gertrude will end us off with what the future looks like for us and how we're drawing upon our small experience at the margins to continue converging food studies with community-based work.
Yeah. So bringing everything together, our future looks very bright, and we just received a confirmation that the Journal for Agricultural Food Systems and Community Development is going to publish a commentary that we gave to them, and we are also looking at publishing in the Canadian Food Studies Journal. We are going to present on collaboration at the GSA Beyond Peer Beyond Symposium, and then the Anarchy Conference.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for listening to us today, for allowing us to share a little bit of what we know with you. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Gertrude. That made me desperate for it to be the growing season again. Without further ado, last but not least, our third speaker for this session is Olivia Ingram. Olivia received her MA last year in English Literature from Simon Fraser University. So Olivia, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share your screen, and thank you very much.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. Also, thanks to the organizers, the speakers, the tech folks, and the workers who mined the minerals and metals that go into the computers that are allowing us to be here today. I'm so thrilled to be part of this event. As Charlie said, my name is Olivia Ingram, and I'm a researcher, poet, and barista and settler to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, colloquially known as Vancouver, BC. These are unceded territories, so I try and conduct myself accordingly. I'm very grateful to be here. The project I'm sharing with you today is Pulp Natural, an essay on coffee, class, and the politics of consumption. This project was submitted in December 2019 as my final MA project to the English department at SFU. I'm considering expanding on this project for a PhD, so I welcome any anecdotes, questions, or lines of inquiry that you might have. While I call this text an essay, it's not a standard academic essay. I have some issues with the form as a area of knowledge production. Perhaps more accurately, it's a biotext, to borrow from poet Fred Waugh. I'm deeply embedded in this text. It's a visual and textual document that is loosely divided across 3 sections: photography, poetry, and critical analysis. The project examines the dynamics of urban spaces, wage labor, consumerism, gentrification, and how sustainable any of it really is through engagement with theorists, cafe patrons, HR handbooks, and newspaper headlines. I'm going to be focusing on poetry as the primary way through this project today. A note on the text: the moments, to borrow from cultural theorist Henri Lefebvre, took place between January 8th, 2019 and July 25th, 2019, while I was working as a part-time barista for $15 an hour, which in Vancouver is $5 less than a living wage, at a cafe which in 2015 was rehabilitated from its 100-year history as a neighborhood grocer to an upscale cafe. The baristas that I was working with at the time requested better working conditions of our employer, an end to the sexism, misogyny, unsafe working conditions, violation of workers' rights, and culture of silence within the company, and attempted to unionize in July 2019. Our demands were not met, and we were unsuccessful in our organizing. 2 weeks following a staff meeting wherein the above issues were discussed, the employers closed the cafe for an afternoon to fire several employees for not being a good fit for the cafe. I was one of those people. I've been working in a different cafe since July of this past year, so my relationship to coffee and the work has changed a great deal since then. All right, let's begin. I live in one of the most livable cities in the world, they say. Western Canada's coastal metropolis, epicenter of performative, health-conscious eco-living, marketed to the world with a high-gloss veneer of cosmopolitan fitness, exclusive real estate opportunities, and the fantasy of bourgeois decadence. Vancouver is a capital dreamland in the cultural imagination. An hour north of Seattle, Vancouver shares the designation as a city with a developed coffee culture, a place of sleek spaces slinging intentionally, if not excessively, obsessively, not always excessively, crafted cups of coffee, with each bean boasting a lineage of artisanal preparation and ethical sourcing. This variety of coffee is complex and delicious capital concoction, whose sleek veneer obfuscates the coffee industry as complicit in exploitation at multiple levels. From the cafe is a site of gentrification running on precarious and underpaid labor, stretching to nearly every level of production, to an industry steeped in ongoing capitalist colonial project that attempts to assuage consumer guilt at every marketable opportunity. I've been making coffee for about 12 years, and it's something I legitimately love doing, but it's far from a lucrative business for those who deal in coffee's material production. I also live in what will be considered the greenest city in the world by 2020, they say, as I was writing this in 2019. This is an initiative championed by a city's former mayor. In 2019, at the launch of the initiative, the municipal government declared its actual intention, the overriding goal being to secure Vancouver's international reputation as a mecca of green enterprise. Vancouver, epicenter of sustainable ethical capitalism. In a 2018 article, geographer Matthew Huber posits climate politics not as an abstract epistemological project governed by the belief or denial of the science, but a process intrinsically linked to global capitalist exploitation and must therefore be reframed in an analysis centered around material control and power. Coffee is an unsustainable industry. By considering the implications of its popularity from various scopes, global, urban, personal, I aim to understand these processes as I live them. Taking advice from scholar and poet Billy Ray Belcourt, who in Thinking Paradoxically reminds us that the researcher must situate themselves in relation to their object of study, as we academics and activists committing to engaging flourishing worlds don't get to hover above the forms of dispersed suffering at which we aim a sociological eye. So I invite you to consider, whose coffee do you have and how did you get it? Pulp natural. A coffee processing technique wherein the pulp skin is stripped from the coffee cherry before drying and processing. The two most other common coffee processing techniques are natural and wash, which describe what, if any, amount of fruit is to be removed by the coffee cherry before drying. Natural coffee is named as such because the fruit is left on the pit as it dries on the raised beds in the sun, allowing the coffee to naturally ferment as it ages for a few weeks. And leaving the fruit on the drupe, otherwise known as the bean, during this drying process, the fruit's natural sweetness seeps into the bean. saturating it with complex, often fruit-forward flavor variations. The result is a more developed and nuanced flavor profile in the final cup of brewed coffee than if the pulp was removed immediately and not given the chance to infuse the drip of the sweet stone fruit. Wash processing requires specific machinery and large amounts of water to remove the entirety of the fruit immediately after harvesting via a water-propelled fruit stripping conveyor belt. This method became popular with the advent of large-scale commodity coffee production, as it allows for a faster processing time and limits possible losses, such as rotting and mold, which can result from fermentation using other processes. Pulp natural is a hybrid of the pre-industrial natural process that mechanically stripped watch processes. As a result, pulp natural coffees manifest flavor characteristics of both processes, the rich, complex, syrupy sweetness and thick body of a natural, along with the clean, bright acidity of a washed. The pulp natural process retains just enough of the coffee's unique flavor profile to make its terroir recognizable, while simultaneously stripping the majority of its eccentric characteristics. What's left is easily approachable and nice tasting coffee, one that does not challenge the palate. As featured in today's free headlines. Cover, the avocado gambit. Millennials have been priced out of Vancouver real estate. As the market cools, developers are trying to reel them back in. Page 2, an extraordinary opportunity to own a parkside home. The spine of a hardcore on the sterile kitchen counter reads, the allure of beauty. A gold potted fern placed on top ensures it is not to be read, will catch streams if it's overwatered and flooding. No other signs of life visible. Ashwood cabinets, sleek black bar stools, white marble. The developer reserves the right to make changes, modifications, or substitutes to the building design. Specifications and floor plans should they be necessary. Renderings, viewings, and layout are for illustrative purposes only. Prices subject to change without notice. Page 4, what's ahead for labor laws, baseline standards? The NDP is set to update 2 core pieces of legislation for the first time since 2002. The changes could drastically shift the power balance between employers and employees. Page 5, how a $6.5 million dream home became a nightmare and real estate meltdown. West Vancouver home now on the market for $3.9 million and the bank owns the house. Below, open a 2.3% savings account. Our juicier savings rates bear fruit all year round. Plant for your future. Page 6, buy one of 116 condos in Coquitlam. Get a $400,000 condo with special bonus offers. Down payment lowered to 10% instead of the typical 15 to 20. Saving for a down payment requires some saving and sacrificing, president of Metro Vancouver Development Company says. But at this development company, we say you can have your avocado toast and eat it too. Get a year's supply of avocado toast on approved credit with the purchase of a starter condo. But what kind of value can buyers expect? Are the avocados conventionally grown, organic, fair trade, bought from a co-op, store, or farmer? Is the toast price fixed? Artisanal with heritage grains? What is the gluten content? Is gluten-free an option? Is it half an avocado for 1 piece of toast, for 2, 1 for 2, 1 for 1? In kits, it comes topped with thin sliced radishes, pea shoots, cherry tomatoes, feta, and poached egg. On commercial, there's minted pea and avocado smash with poached egg and arugula, vegan on sourdough. In Gastown, it's fresh baked, made from scratch, thick cut sourdough with lightly sliced avocado on a cutting board with honey. How are the portions determined? What are the daily maximums? Will the toast be delivered on demand, or do I have to join others and wait to get it handed out in the bread line? Will there be charging all that's available? I would like to understand the terms and conditions of this legally binding contract before signing. I would like to understand what kind of sacrifices are necessary. Page 7. The Bank of Canada decides to keep the benchmark at 1.75%, citing Vancouver real estate slowdown. But they're not worried about the effects of carbon pricing on the economy. There will be no recession. But the governor of the bank knows it only takes a little bit of politics to mess up a great forecast. Saturday. Standing by the grinders, I am tamping. A printer spitting a counterful of chits, grinders churning beans through burrs to cacophony, the music muzzled by the din of many people pacing, casually demanding my efficiency. The weekend brunch crowd mulls around, waiting on the arrival of their drugs. Concerned customers filter in from the patio to ask me, do I know about the guy outside? On the bench out front? What is to be done about the guy outside? I wonder, maybe he's resting. They don't ask if we have a naloxone kit, but maybe somebody should call the police. Is anybody calling the police? The man on the bench, does he belong where he is? A manager makes a call, and so authorities en route serve the conserved denizens. Sounds of emergency sirens overtake the loud, continuous street traffic noise. An ambulance skirts up to the curb, and I do not see them attend to the man on the bench. Medical treatment is less needed than police intervention, as those sirens sub quickly in. Standing by the window now, I am filling glass jars with 106 grams for drip coffee. 2 imposingly white male cops bring the man from the bench to the table on the side of the shop. They frisk the young guy, read his Indigenous, empty his pockets. Contents, a bouncy ball and some change, sit him down. The biggest cop bounces the ball. 1, as he mounts. 2, his interrogation. 3, coffee beans clink into glass jars as the sound of commodity fetishism failed to drown threats of incarceration. Tell us your name or else you'll be sleeping on our bench downtown. My intervention would be ineffectual and I'm being redirected anyway. I have to move from the window. Standing by the till now, the hot yoga class is let out across the road. 2 middle-aged white ladies, faces smug and Lulu Lycra, can't decide who will order first. They insist on a passive-aggressive politeness, a back and forth of you go, no you go, no you. A queue is forming behind them and the waiting launch impatient eyes. Wanting them gone, I say, somebody go. They chortle, oblivious to the rest of it, and one meets my eyes to say, maybe you should go. I reply honestly, I would love to. After Neil Smith asks, is gentrification a bad word? Times, deprive it, embourgeoisement times, new times, plate my new embourgeoisement times, a all times, York. Homo economicus, after transnational spaces in everyday lives, from David Lay. Homo economicus, the habitus of embourgeoisement, savoir-faire, bonfire vanities, cosmopolitanism and the satanic verses, different verses below the poverty line, grounded, the habitus, Zen global shift, a all, Homo economicus, the internalization of in economic activity, satanic, a all, a turbulent world, industrial change, a all. They will ask, which milk is best for climate change? How much greenhouse gas emissions do your individual choices contribute to the atmosphere? What portion of this decay are you personally responsible for? Choose a foodstuff in a westernized diet from the drop-down menu. How often do you have it? 1 to 2 times a week? 3 to 5 times a week? Once a day? Twice a day or more? Never? Coffee, 1 cup. Brew method unspecified. Twice or more a day, 311 kilograms. Using unspecified amount of water. Usage increases if drinking decaf via Swiss water process. Milk, almond, twice or more a day, 102 kilograms, using 54,084 liters of water. Milk, dairy, twice a day or more, 458 kilograms, using 91,466 liters of water. Milk, oat, twice or more a day, 131 kilograms, using 7,024 liters of water. Milk, rice, twice or more a day, 172 kilograms, using 39,284 liters of water. Milk, soy, twice or more a day, 142 kilograms, using unspecified amount of water. And some timeline of headlines. Nestle pays $200 a year to bottle water near Flint, where water is undrinkable. Starbucks committing $10 million to recyclable cup solutions. Nestle and Starbucks reached $7.18 billion coffee licensing deal. One of our major social impact pillars is sustainability. We are a company in SICK that believes in the fabric of mission and values, that the pursuit of profit is not in conflict with the pursuit of doing good. Jab Holdings Raymond family admits Nazi past. This covert European holding company is buying up all the coffee and donuts. We can overthrow garbage. Greenpeace activists ship plastic monster back to Nestle's headquarters. With 2.6 million disposable cups trashed a week, Vancouver struggles to find solutions. Canadian trash at heart of war with Philippines to be burned in Metro Vancouver power plant. McDonald's investing $6.5 million in Guatemalan farm assistance. Coca-Cola is making a big push into coffee. Unfair coffee prices push Hondurans to migrate. Trump vows to cut foreign aid to 3 major coffee producing countries, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Coffee producers demand immediate action amidst price crisis. Hit by a price crash, Colombia wants to break its coffee free from the New York Stock Exchange. Crisis forces Colombia's coffee farmers to fight for living wage. Alaida Estate geisha earns $1,029 per pound in record-breaking Best of Panama action. Coffee growers in crisis face a new blow from Trump's tariff threat. Opinion, fair prices desperately needed to end coffee farmer poverty. Here's some money advice. Just buy the coffee. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Olivia. And thanks again for being perfectly on time. I think from a conversation about pedagogy, that was a real illumination of breaking the boundaries of academic knowledge sharing. Beautiful but haunting and troubling some of our received ideas of how we might do better. So a truly interdisciplinary presentation within a truly interdisciplinary session. Thank you to all of our presenters, and we'd love to invite questions.
Welcome back from your break. I hope you're able to step outside and get some fresh air and some sunshine. If you're here in Calgary, I know it's absolutely beautiful out there this afternoon, so I hope you were able to do that on your break. My name is Abby Landon. I am currently a graduate student in the Department of Geography, and I'm very excited this afternoon to be facilitating this group of panelists of community practitioners from all around Alberta and into BC. I am very curious to hear about their work and their perspectives and their value of food and how they've seen that play out in their communities as well. So just as a reminder, we will be recording the panelist discussion, and as we have with our other sessions, we will turn that recording off when we jump into the community discussion for questions from the audience. As for timing, our session will run from now until about 4 o'clock. After intros, I will facilitate some questions of our panelists until approximately 3:40. At that time, we will open it up to you, the audience, for questions of our 3 panelists as well. If you have questions, you can put these into the chat at any time throughout the discussion. We'll just go in order of the ones that are submitted, and we'll draw questions from there. And then we'll wrap up at 4 o'clock and pass it back to, I believe, Simon for some closing remarks of our entire symposium for the day. So first of all, I'd like to give a brief introduction to our 3 panelists so that you can know a little bit about them. First is Colby Peterson. Colby, if you'd mind waving so we can see where you're at. Colby farms, dreams, and eats food on 160 acres affectionately called Wildwood Farm. Located on Treaty 8 lands and Métis territory, home of the Sakani, Danazat Beaver, Slavey, Nehewuk Cree, Saulteaux Anishinaabe, the Denisoulina Chippewayan, and the Métis peoples near what is now called Dawson Creek in British Columbia. Together with her mentors, friends, and farm partners, Tim and Linda Ewert, she is working to co-create a cooperative and intergenerational farm. They are endeavoring to find more farmers for their human team while using their Percheron horse team whenever possible to complete work at a joyful and non-industrial pace. Colby works with Young Agrarians, an organization dedicated to growing and supporting the new generation of ecological and regenerative farmers, and develops programming for land access, farm transition, and farm apprenticeships. Being a strong potluck advocate, she believes meals made from the closest fields and gardens and shared among friends and neighbors are instrumental in thriving agriculture and necessary for a more just world. And if you would mind joining me in welcoming Colby.
Thank you, Abby.
Secondly, we have Chantal Tallow. Chantal is a proud Blackfoot woman from the Kainai Nation and the food mind of the Aksoyop, one of the first Indigenous catering companies in Alberta. She's always thinking of new and creative ways to make the comfort foods we all grew up with. Taught how to and how not to cook by her grandparents and other culinary-minded people in her life, she learned very quickly how to cook comfort foods for her family. Chantal completed the Aboriginal Ambassador Program with Aboriginal experiences out of Ottawa and holds both a food and beverage certificate and a food handling certificate. She considers herself on a food journey and loves every minute of it. And Chantal, if you'd mind waving, and we're happy to welcome you to our panel today. And last but not least, Audra Stevenson. For the last decade, Audra has taken ideas and transformed them into solutions that have had a positive impact in the arts, technology, and small business sectors across Alberta. Audra has now found her home at Leftovers Foundation, where she is focused on social innovation in our food systems. By combining a BFA in technical theatre from the University of Alberta and an MBA from the University of Calgary, Audra has developed the perfect skill set to build creative solutions to large societal problems. Throughout her work and personal life, Audra invests in empowerment, empathy, and creativity. And after hours, she loves the Star Trek marathon, video games, and her family of humans and cats. And finally, Audra, if you'd mind waving so we can see you, and we're very happy to have you on our panel today too. Okay, so the first part, we will jump into some questions. I will allow you as panelists to decide who would like to share first or what order you'd like to share in. And just for an approximate timeline, it would be great to keep an idea in mind of about 2 to 3 minutes per panelist, just so that we can hear from everybody on these wide variety of topics. So the first question I would like to put out to our panel is if you could please share how you have been personally and professionally involved in food and or agriculture here in Alberta.
Oh, me and Colby tied for unmuting ourselves.
Go ahead, Audra. I'll follow you.
Perfect. So I'm in terms of like my professional experience, I'm definitely a food newbie. I started working with Leftovers Foundation about 1.5 years ago, initially as a consultant, and then I said, please hire me. I'm so interested in what you're doing and so passionate about it. Please let me work for you. But personally, both sides of my family, my grandparents were farmers. And I was part of the generation that got to visit on the weekends, which was very fun. But my family is incredibly food focused. All of our gatherings center around food, and it's a big component of my life and community gathering and all of those pieces.
Hi, everyone. So I do live on the BC side now, but I grew up on a farm in Alberta. Farming was my parents' supplementary income, kind of like the backdrop to their other lives, and its focus wasn't really on food production so much. We had a garden that was perpetually choked out in weeds, and I was mostly child labor on the farm. But and I wasn't particularly interested in or invested in coming back to the farm, but the cyclical nature of things sometimes surprises us. And eventually I did come back and grew my first vegetable garden on their farm. And for anyone familiar with who Bill Mollison was, he said that growing a garden is shockingly subversive, and it can be an act of peaceful rebellion, and that revolutionaries in the future are going to be the ones who change from consumption to production. And I thought, well, heck, I guess that's a good place to start. So my personal project turned professional when every single seed I planted germinated and flourished. And I thought, oh gosh, I should probably share this abundance with my community. And it got me hooked, and it was kind of the gateway into farming in a larger way. And then, as Abby mentioned, I do work with young agrarians in Alberta, and I've run the Alberta Apprenticeship Program for a few years now. And so I've been able to match new and aspiring farmers with mentor farms. And actually now we have mentor farms all across the prairies, not just in Alberta, which is really, really exciting. And I try to balance this work with the farm work at Tim and Linda's farm, as Abby also mentioned. So it's a very exciting time to have both my kind of personal and professional lives inform one another, and feed off of one another, literally and figuratively.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I hope so. Okay. Nistunadaniko Ikinanski. Hello, my name is Chantal Tallow. I am a former resident of Calgary. I recently made a move back home to the Blood Reserve. I have lived off reserve for 17 years now. Food has always been a part of my life. My grandparents were into horse racing. So I wasn't into the horse racing part. I was into the lady that was cooking burgers part. So it was kind of always there, and it just sat idle until I became a single mother of a 2-year-old, and I moved into the city, and that is where my culinary journey began. And for me, it was about learning the foods that I grew up on. learning the foods that my grandma and grandpa had made because they had passed away in 96 and 99. So they were no longer in my life, and being in the city, my mother's only child, I found comfort in cooking foods that I knew my grandma and grandpa really liked. So from there on, from my Lethbridge, I had moved up to Edmonton, where I continued my second year in culinary. And it was last month before graduation that I was ready to quit, because everyone was allowed to cook what they had wanted to, and they told me that they see me excelling in French cuisine, and I was really upset about that. I was like, no, like I really wanted to show off what I could do, and I was really mad about that. So I was able to talk with someone and at the college, and I said, what is equivalent to, I don't want to lose my funding or any of this, what I've started. What do I do? So I spent 20 hours with the elder on the blood reserve to learn about food preservation. So I was able to graduate in 2006. I was very pregnant with my second child, and at that moment, I wasn't able to utilize what I was doing. And it was a few years later when I moved to Calgary that I was able to do what I wanted to do, and that was fundraising. I started fundraising in Calgary for my nephews to get to the provincials in Edmonton for hockey. So I started making banana cream pies, bannock and fry bread. And that's where it started. Shell called me and offered me a huge job. And I told them, I am just fundraising. I'm not a business owner or anything. And they told me to get on it. And they were my start off. They kind of gave me that push they offered to pay for my license and my permit if I could do that. So in 10 days, I had to come up with the Axiope name. And that's how it all began. It was just fundraising we want more food and we want it now. So here I am 4.5 years later. I started with a partnership and I'm now the sole owner of Axiope and halfway through my second cookbook. So that is me right now, transitioning from urban back to the reserve.
That's wonderful. Thank you to the three of you for sharing some of your background. The second question is based on your experiences. How have you seen food and/or agriculture bring about social change?
Should we just do the same order? Yeah. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks, Audra.
So on a very micro level, what I've seen in my own personal community during COVID, especially, was just a change in how people approached food and providing food to their community. In my neighborhood, there was a lot of taking care of each other, making sure that high-risk individuals didn't need to go to the grocery store, food sharing through Facebook groups, things like that, which was definitely a change in how I interacted with the neighborhood. But even on a kind of broader scale, I definitely in educating myself over the last year and a bit, with the help of lots of my colleagues at Leftovers and the broader community, I've definitely changed my thinking about how, I think you guys had a speaker earlier about food being a political commodity, essentially, and how it, connects to larger movements. I think predominantly working in communities where there's issues of food access and not enough food, food often becomes this like it's a unique symbol, I think, that crosses a lot of groups across politics, across socioeconomic status, across race. When you can't access food, it's a real symbol of the injustice and the inequality that's happening in systems. And so I definitely see food as when you can look at food and how can we change food systems and move towards more just systems and food sovereignty. I definitely, like, compared to where I was 2 years ago, I think food is like a core tenet of that social change. And it's really like an intersection of a ton of things. It's hard not to talk about food access and food justice without talking about homelessness and poverty and city planning, and all of these components kind of all come together, and food is just one piece of that puzzle that intersects with a ton of things. So yeah, I've definitely I've had a real education over the last 2 years as to the social impact of food. And I'll pass it off to Colby at that.
Thanks, Audra. Yeah, it's like a kind of a never-ending spider web that we pull on when food is at the center. And we pull in one thread and see how it's completely connected to the whole web. The momentum of food and agriculture and its capacity for social change, like, it feels really tangible to me. And I mean, I'm an optimist and my work on the farm and with YA certainly continues to fuel that optimism. And I do feel really lucky and fortunate to be working and surrounded with people who are dedicated and committed to seeing this change happen. I used to say a homemade meal made from food from your own garden or farm could change a person's life. And I mean, I think it can to some degree, and definitely with supplemental riveting conversation and education. But it does need to go much farther beyond that on a much more macro scale. So I guess I should maybe introduce Young Agrarians a little bit with a little more depth. So we are an organization that is working to grow and help this new generation of ecological, organic, regenerative kind of farmers. I'll probably throw some statistics in later on just to like really pump you guys up. But for now, I'll share just a couple of the programs that we're involved in and how I see those bringing about change. So on the BC side, Young Agrarians has a land matching program, which essentially pairs together land seekers and land owners who have some common idea and vision of how they would like to see the land stewarded and how food is grown there. And so the land seekers are landless people who now will be growing and providing food to a community on land that a landowner perhaps that no longer has the capacity to grow food on, or just would like to share because they see greater opportunity for what that land can do. And recently they just made their 100th match. So 100 more farmers are stewarding land in BC, and we're hoping to see that program come to Alberta sooner than later. On the Alberta side, the apprenticeship program that we've been working on, I've got to see, and again, it's a fairly micro scale because it's a fairly young program, and every year there are some farmers that come in, but I've got to see how apprenticing on a farm can profoundly change their lives, and they're coming out on the other side wanting to grow food for their communities and become farmers and build and bridge communities in their work. They're going out and wanting to shake the hands of their community, saying like, choose me as your farmer, shake my hand, come see the land I grow food on, and like have this carrot, and you'll never be able to eat baby carrots from a bag again because this carrot will change your life, kind of thing. And which means is that like through these programs, I think there are the capacity for many, many more acres to be taken care of and stewarded by people who deeply understand the potential of food to create change and understand how food is that web, and that political change, ecological change, economic change, all those things impact people, and so are inherently social change too. So yeah, many more hands in the soil, boots on the ground, and voices in the air saying food matters, and how it's grown matters, and how you eat matters. And just briefly, COVID really did change a lot this year, and we saw in our network of farmers that they were saying their communities started coming to them, and they saw the empty shelves at the grocery, and they felt that insecurity that we really all had the privilege to, most of us have never felt. And so they came to their farmers and said, I just bought a chest freezer. I'd like to buy a quarter of a beef or a half of a pork or that tub of vegetables and feed my family from your fields. And I really hope that after COVID is over, that those relationships persist. But it was kind of this hopeful little glimmer saying, like, our communities are really starting to care about getting their food from their local farmers. I'll pass it off to you, Chantal.
While being in Calgary, I supported local as much as possible. I would buy from the farmers market, and I learned that co-op, when I went in there, I would see these little signs on there and it would say which farm they're from. And I thought, wow, that's so nice, because you don't see that in like Superstore or Costco, which family name grew this vegetable or brought in the beef. Well, since I began in 2016, so much has changed for myself with what I create. For instance, pemmican and dry meat and Indian popcorn are the top 3 snacks that are ordered from me. And all of these are foods that can be preserved. And pemmican is, it would take us through the months. It would carry us right through the months, because it's filled with, it's got its meat, it's got its berries, it's got its fat in there. And if it's packed well, it can keep right through the winter. So when I started, my thoughts were comfort food, and just that mindset, I'm just going to cook foods that, just like I said, made me feel better, made my heart warm. But I'd start getting asked, can you do dry meat? Can you do this pemmican? Can you cook for this ceremony? So during that time I was in this partnership, we both had there was a cultural indifference. He was going through a cultural identity, believing he was Métis. And at the same time, I was telling him not to pursue that until he was, we knew the answers. And that was one of what gapped us. There was a gap that came between us with this cultural identity, where I was wanting everything to be, I was getting called out for not being authentic because I'm buying from a grocery store, I'm not growing my own food. And at that time, bison wasn't sold in restaurants, nor was elk. And bring it up to 2019, they approved it finally. So that was a breakthrough. I was like, oh yes, because I would be getting asked, can you make elk? Can you make these specialty foods? And these specialty foods are actually foods that come from our ancestors. These are the foods that they were raised on. And so that's where all my mindset was just changing. My business plan was no longer a business plan. It was a life goal, a life journey to keep how did they survive without these Costco's and these superstores? How I wish I can call myself a hunter, but I can't do that. That's why I am so grateful that everything that has happened in 2020 has taken me back home. And I feel like just like I was saying, it's like a food journey for me. I'm learning more about where I come from, what they were raised on, how they were able to have such big feasts. How did they do it? So listening, I did a podcast back in August, and it's a field guide to eating in Canada. And it'll be released in later January to mid-February. So on there, you'll hear me with my 89-year-old uncle who would talk about rabbit snares, wild onions, talking about turnips, finding them along the hills, just having that keen eye for these to make this rabbit stew. And then finding out about how did bannock and fry bread come in. And I'm always getting told it's a Scottish recipe. Okay, well, I just made it better. So that's my only argument is I just made it better. So social change has really, like COVID-19, coming to the reserve, I found out that they have a community gardens here. And when I took the tour through that, they had potatoes, they had the onions, they had the carrots, and that's what they were doing all summer is they were distributing throughout the community, keeping everyone, dropping off care packages for everybody. And this is locally grown. And I am so impressed, I cannot wait for them to reopen so I can get in there and learn more about, how, because now that I'm back home, I've inherited my grandparents, their land. So with owning my own company, that would be even better to say that I grow my own stuff, and even if it's a start with one cow, one buffalo, I'd say that's a start because our food is being recognized. I've gone into gas stations where I've seen dry meat and pemmican. They're from a company up north, and I'm just blown away by that. Like, wow, our food is really getting out there. I'm working with UNESCO at the moment, and we are working on a project in Edmonton. Waterton, pardon me, Waterton. And Waterton had a wildfire a couple years ago. So it's going through its regrowth stages. And right now they are planning to do trails through that area that was burned because a lot of camps, Blackfoot camps, were unearthed. And so will be incorporating the pemmican and the dry meat and the Indian popcorn. It'll be like a storytelling and eating kind of day trip to walk through. So I'm home for a very good reason. I'm really excited. So I'll talk more later. Okay.
Thank you so much. Just for you as panelists, I'm going to jump ahead to question 4, since question 3, it also included a lot of what you've already touched on. So question 4 asks, you all work with food in different parts of the system, from cultivation to distribution to cooking. And we would love to know what opportunities that you see regarding social change within your specific area of the system that you engage with most closely. And maybe we'll change the order a little bit this time, if I could invite Colby to go first.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Abby. Yeah, so I guess now is the moment. I'll throw some of these stats your way. So we, right now the farming demographic across Canada has, I mean, it's changed substantially since the early 1900s. At that point in time, over 30% of the population, they farmed, and now it's less than 2%. And so we have this enormous land base that has immense food cultivating and harvesting potential. We're also an aging farming population, so most of the farmers are closing in on 60 years old, and the majority of them are planning to retire or transition their land in the next 10 years. But we don't have, it's like a very depressingly small queue of farmers who are stepping up to manage that land. And most of, well, in the Young Agrarians Network, the kind of, well, an even smaller portion of that population is hoping to farm with these generative land practices where they're leaving the ecosystem, the soil better off, hopefully, after having been in a relationship with it. So we, Young Agrarians, is looking at that sort of trajectory, and we're really hoping that we can cultivate people who can steward land in these regenerative ways. So that support, you know, I talked about a couple of the programs that we have on the go that are trying to accomplish that. So I suppose the people that are stepping up to this task, and actually who are largely urban-based people, they're not coming from farming families. They need a lot of support and network and community to learn how to do this. And their motive is changing that culture within agriculture. And they're asking some pretty big questions. What does farming, what should it look like coming up? How in their farming journey can they address some of the biggest injustices within the food system? Like, what does decolonization mean within farming? How can land tenure look different than it did? Like we certainly have a long way to go in answering those questions, and those questions really don't have answers. They're relationships. It's building relationships with communities, and collectively deciding how we can manage this land to not just cultivate good food, but cultivate justice. Yeah, the journey, I think, in the sphere is of itself more important than really what is grown in the end, and how what is grown, both in the terms of food and relationships, is accessible and distributed with justice in mind. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. In the mixed order, I don't know if Audra or Chantal wants to take the mic from here, but I'll pass it off.
Yeah, perhaps if we can continue in the same circle. So Chantal, if you'd mind joining in next.
So right now, it was so hard to say, to be me in the city because of the barriers of, I can't have a smokehouse in my backyard, and we're on the reserve. The laws are so different with food handling and all of that. And those laws, I believe should change to give everyone an equal opportunity, because, growing our own food, sustaining your own reserve, that would be, to keep within itself. Right now, they're telling us not to leave our reserve, stay home. That was one of my thoughts, was to, how does one like myself start? Because I am just in the first stages of reaching out and learning my reserve and what can be done, because the blood reserve is the largest reserve in Canada. And we've got the BTAP, it's the Blood Tribe Irrigation Project. And they have so much land there, and they have companies from Japan, Texas, all over. And what more spaces that can be done about this community garden to include more for employment as well, and learning as well. And when being in the city, this is one example, is my company was, there's a Cobb's bread, and Cobb's bread, we were compared to Cobb's bread. In 2000, every year I'm trying to beat my statistics. And in 2019, we did over 28,000 pounds of baked bread, bannock and fry bread. And this is all handmade bread. And so I'm thinking, wow, there's just like 3-4 of us, and Cobb's bread is all over the place, and we're being compared. Yes, I think that is a social change, because you can't go into the mall and find an Indian taco or find that Indian popcorn. To be walking around in the mall, window shopping, having your little snack and your mint tea, I'd love to see that one day. And I did feel like it was a big social change becoming a caterer. Hearing back from the city of Calgary, being told that I am the only Indigenous caterer, and being depended on so much. So in order for me to have accomplished a lot of that, my support was focused on the local farmers and the farmers market. That's what helped me. So being in the city, I had all my links. So being on the reserve is like a big reset at this time. It's a big transition for me. And I cannot wait to learn more. I know a few of like the berry picking, the sweetgrass, and I'd love to go on the hunt. Hunting season is coming up, and I can see on like the social media pages that they all are getting ready for these hunts, and I'm just like, I want to go. I want to learn more. I don't want to just be reading about it or Googling about it. I want hands-on to say, yes, I've done a kill. I've been there, and I was spoiled as a child. So I didn't have to eat wild meat, the game meat that my grandpa brought in. It was only beef or chicken. So now I'm getting a taste for that, and I'm thinking, wow, I've been missing out all these years. So now I've introduced it to my kids, and which I'm trying to, that we're just not about hamburgers, kids. Let's have an open mind and see what else we can do. Over the summer, I showed them a little area where there was strawberries growing in from the ground, and they were just mind blown. And I'm going through this transition with my urban children. Unlike me, I got to grow up on the reserve, and I didn't leave till I was 21. So now I'm 38, and my kids are, they know nothing about growing any of that. They just know the shopping part. So it's 2020 sure changed everything, really made a lot of shift. And my focus was just like to get the food out there. Now it's just, where does that food come from? I want to take steps back and relearn more about that.
Thanks, Chantal. I definitely relate on the I feel like I dove in to one area and now of the food system, and now I have to take a step back to like get that full picture. It's I feel like I'm just going to be learning for the rest of my life. It's probably pretty accurate. So thank you for sharing. Oh yeah, okay. So to answer the panel question, so definitely like this is something we talk about internally at Leftovers a lot. We are a nonprofit. We do have charitable status, and that kind of puts us with one foot into the emergency food sector with working with the food bank and mustard seed and food service, social services. And so there's a couple areas where social change would be great. So the first that I think it's really important to talk about is like how siloed everything is, especially within like if we're going from like food production all the way through to people receiving food service through service agencies. It's incredibly segmented and there's not a lot of talk between the different areas. And so that's definitely something where I think it would benefit to have more conversation and collaboration through all the kind of different levels. But then like if we're diving into kind of the emergency food side of things and general food access, there's a lot of power structure issues. So when you interact with social services, a lot of the time, they're the ones who decide who gets what. So you need to prove that you need to access food. You need to prove that you can't access it in a different way. And then they will tell you what food you're going to receive. And so a lot of the work that we're trying to do at Leftovers is how do we move into a space of more food dignity where people have choice and it's not dependent on you bringing in your pay stubs and proving that you should have access to this food. And so looking at moving into more innovative models and also just like recognizing that emergency food services are supposed to be for emergencies, and we've now come into this space where the food bank has been operating for however many years, and so there's now this immense pressure on social services to be the solution to food insecurity, when really the role that they were originally supposed to play was more on the side of a band-aid solution, filling up the gap. And so how can we as a food system, think higher level, think longer term, looking at solutions like universal basic income? Is that something that can provide a solution that we're looking for? I definitely I'm very into the idea of universal basic income. I don't think it's definitely not across the board solution, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think there's a lot of hesitancy in food service, in emergency service, to not get into the political aspects of it. But as like we're having this discussion, it's pretty hard to not approach food from a justice perspective, because the current system is unjust. And so I really am hoping that what Leftovers and other community members are working towards is moving away from emergency food relief and into a place of how do we create a system that justly serves everybody, and producers are a part of that, distribution is a part of that, retail is a part of that, social services are a part of that. So it really again is like this interconnected web, where you pull one string and you find 50 other that kind of open up. But I think the more we can break down the silos and break down the power structures, and kind of come together with a lot of perspectives, centering the right people in the story, I think that's my hope for the social change and kind of the sector that I'm involved in. That was long-winded.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks, Audra. I think it's amazing to see three very different perspectives on the opportunities of where we can go practically in different directions with how to use food as an agent of social change. So that's wonderful. I am going to jump to question number 6, because this is, I think, a question that really resonates with me. And I think we have a wide group of people within this session today who would also benefit from hearing your perspective on this question. So the final question here is, how can academics and researchers actively support food movements within our wider communities from your perspective of the front lines? And perhaps this time if we could start with Chantal.
Okay. Well, with my company, I have had a lot of outreach, and which I thought was amazing. It was I have actually a couple classes in Calgary when my kitchen was open. It was for me, cooking is a stress reliever. So I have bannock in a panic and fry bread in the city. So it's kind of, we will get together. We'll go through step by step. I'll show you how to make a bannock. And then the second part of it is you make a bannock and I'll make a bannock, and we'll do comparisons. Because I find myself that I have never made one piece of bannock or one piece of fry bread that has ever been similar. So, you know, I talk to my food. I pray to my food. I send it love when I'm making it. So that is my connectivity with this. So when I've gotten a lot of I have a lot of people who have asked me about, you know, the food diversity, how I felt about it being in the city as a lone Indigenous caterer amongst all these other caterers that are serving and can back each other up. While I was in the city kind of being brave and trying to face the backlash of it all, you know, like I had said, you know, you're not authentic. Well, to me, when I created the name Axiop, Axiop means we are going to eat in the Blackfoot language. And Indigenous, I wasn't too sure if I was going to go through that, but at that moment, that Indigenous felt very, it felt like a strong word for me, being urban, and that I was creating something like the big parking lot, and you see the little crack in there, and there's a beautiful little flower. That's what I had imagined with where this food would come from. And now that pemmican is, you know, being largely out there, they're asking, what is that? What is berry soup? What is mint tea? What is wild mint tea? Where do you get that? Do you grow it in your garden? And you know, everything that I'm asked, I find I don't have an answer. I'm able to tell it in a story way. So that is how I'm able to, you know, speak. I'm still learning to speak publicly because I always assumed I'd always just be in the kitchen cooking. I never imagined that I'd be online, or let alone having a New Year's Eve cooking party with Indigenous Tourism Canada in my kitchen. And it's a different life, you know, that we're all getting used to. And I hope one day that we all can gather to talk this all out and, you know, and meet each other. But I am very grateful to be here to, you know, have my say in this through my big transition, because usually it's the other way around, where it's the reserve girl going into the big city, but this time I'm coming from the big city and I'm learning, and I feel brand new. And the welcoming back here has been amazing. And working on my second cookbook is what is taking me back. My steps back is where I want to. How did they make, when they were given that first bag of flour, how did they make it? So those are the things that I'm trying to step back on my experiences, is speaking about what the elders, what they have. And the elders, you know, they're aging, they are getting up there. Just like my uncle, he was 89, he's 89 right now. And him talking about how this change from his age and my age, it's so rapid how we're doing. We moved forward so fast, and now we're taking a step back, and it's allowing everybody to refocus, readjust on, you know, just like myself, my priorities, where if this should happen again, I'll be ready for it. Because yes, there was toilet paper shortages. They were saying there was soya sauce shortages. There was all kind of shortages when they were saying that this pandemic was starting. And it was scary, because I myself got scared, and I thought, I wish I knew how to garden. I wish I knew how to grow my own food, so I'm not having to worry about it. So that is why I'm here today, to learn as well and educate as well from what I know and what I've been taught, and to share along with who I am and where I come from.
And Chantal, we are so appreciative of you sharing your stories with us today. So if this is a platform that is new to you, we are very grateful to have you. So thank you. We'll pass the torch over to Audra next.
All right. So I think when I was in school and then transitioned into actually working, I really wished that I had been way more connected to what the real life experience is in my industry, and whether that was in business or in theater or in the food systems. And so I think the best thing that you can do when you're in school is to reach out to organizations that interest you, that are involved in like the kind of activism or change that you want to be a part of. So whether that's on the production side or it's on the social services side, don't wait until you're graduated and out of school, or you're, 10 years down the road studying something to, I don't know, reach out. I think get involved now and see what like the real life consequences of things are. And just like, yeah, be an active part of your community. I think an important thing that I've learned over the last year and a half is that, communities are incredibly diverse, and, blanket solutions never work. It's really hard to aggregate across such diverse communities. So the more perspectives that you can understand firsthand, the more people you talk to, the more experiences that you can, hear about, the better you're going to be at critical thinking and, having creative solutions and, just being a good ally, if that's what you want to be, or a good center of the movement, if that's what you want to be. All those pieces need to be informed by actual community connections. So yeah, reach out. If you want to get involved at Leftovers, email me. I'll pass it off to Colby.
Hey, thanks, Audra. Yeah, I agree 100% when you're in school, if you can become directly involved. I mean, I don't know if all post-secondary institutions have programs like a community service learning program where you kind of make these partnerships with community organizations and you essentially spend like a little apprenticeship with them or something. But yeah, if you want to get a taste for anything with some hands-on experience, that's a beautiful way to do it. Now I'm sorry, I'll try to keep this concise, but I think I was mixing my thoughts for number 6, building on top of the 5th question, which we didn't get to do. So I'm going to try to like condense it into something that hopefully makes sense on the spot. The 5th question was based on our experiences working with food in Alberta. What role do you see food playing in the way provinces and cities are shaped? And I really do see academics and researchers being instrumental in moving those visions forward in partnership with folks such as Audra Chantal, with farmers. I mean, pardon the farming pun, but it's a pretty like beefy ambition to think that like nothing short of a global socioeconomic restructuring seems to be in order if we want to address the injustices, not just within the food network, but I mean in our lives, in our broad lives. And for me, a resilient population, among other things, of course, but is when the masses provide for the masses rather than the few providing for the masses. And when we think about our connection to like our own sustenance, to where the things that we need to keep us alive, we're so disconnected from them, be it food or our heat or with the building supplies of what our houses are made out of, our clothing, you know, all these things that we need to stay alive, and we have so little connection to their source. And I think in the topic of food, becoming a little closer to our source is something that we can absolutely do, whether we're in the city or whether we're a rural dweller or a researcher, academic, etc. So as far as how academics and researchers can actively support the food movement, I see partnerships and relationships completely. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it takes a village to support a farm or many farms. And I can see that urban centers can completely support themselves, you know, growing their own fruit and vegetables in the city. You know, broader or larger farms outside of the city can support in other ways, but we can become much more resilient closer to home. You know, many food growers in the Young Agrarians Network want to grow food because one, they like the lifestyle, but two, because they really understand the ripple effects throughout the broader society of what they're doing and the impact that they're having by planting literal seeds, but also planting the seeds of a different culture. And I think, especially now with the discourse and research around how certain farming practices will result in carbon sequestration and will result in higher nutritional density in the food that we eat, that institutions can support the work of good farmers by verifying that discourse through data and through research, and then helping with the dissemination of that along, you know, among the urban population and the eaters. I mean, educating consumers is something that farmers recognize as important, but often don't have the time to do. So that is something I definitely see allyship with, is that we support farms, yes, by buying food from them, but also by being in relationship with them and helping people understand how we're all, you know, so interconnected. And really what I would love to see is that whether you're a kindergartner or a university student, that, you know, somewhere along, you know, your education is that you have the pleasure of eating a meal that you grew from scratch or helped grow from scratch. And that the infusion of how to grow and procure and prepare food is right in the curriculum. I mean, that would just be a dream for sure. As a farmer, I would love to have a researcher come out to my farm and be like, let's see what happens. Like, you know, you can use this land and your observation, and I'll take data for you. And we'll do this experiment together and see how your practices are actually, like, are they moving you further towards your goal? That would be absolutely a dream. I think I've taken us over time, so I better stop there, but thank you.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks so much, Colby. I first of all just want to extend a huge thank you to each of our three panelists for sharing all of your wonderful stories and thoughts and considerations. There was one thing, Audra, that you mentioned that really stood out to me, is that you mentioned how you are coming into this from one specific angle. And I can appreciate that all of us are doing the same, that we each come in with our own specific perspective to looking at such a wide topic, and that this is a lifelong process to really uncovering different perspectives and angles. And my hope is that this event today has really served to widen our perspectives and really engage our curiosity as we move into those specific channels and perspectives that we engage in most closely, to have a wider view of what everyone else is involved in as well. So thank you to each of you. At this point, we will turn off the recording so that we can have to reach out to each of our three panelists, to Audra and to Colby and to Chantal. We are so grateful for you joining us today. And if you have further questions to continue this conversation, I would encourage you to do so. I will pass this back over now to Chelsea and to Simon for our final remarks of the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you immensely to our three panelists. It's always such a joy to see you and speak with you. And I hope our connections and collaborations can continue indefinitely into the future. So drum roll to start off our celebratory closing remarks. We have our Aksayop cookbook winners. And again, Aksayop is a cookbook that was created by our dear Chantal Tallow. And I'm going to include it in the chat, the 9 copies that are going to be sent out. And if you could please email me your mailing address by Wednesday, the 20th, in order to receive your copy, that would be greatly appreciated. So those are now in the chat. Congratulations. And now Simon will lead us in our closing remarks.
Thanks, Chelsea. And thanks again for kind of emceeing the whole event. Really appreciate it. I'll keep it pretty brief. And then we will have an open room, kind of leave the Zoom running for a while after people that want to continue discussing a lot of the topics we touched on today. But I just want to say, first of all, it would be nice to have a symposium or conference of this sort in person, where you can network and we can meet up after and bounce ideas off each other. I'm very glad at the way everyone's kind of participated in the topics we covered, the different ends of the kind of study of food and agriculture that we come from. Coming together as a community to look at these problems has been, at least for myself, very helpful in my own research, the own kind of way I think about this stuff. Fostering a community at the University of Calgary through the Calgary Institute of Humanities has been it's been very helpful for me, and it's nice to have everyone else join our small food studies research group for this event. Obviously, going forward, this is hopefully just kind of the start of a conversation for a lot of us as we study food, as we study farm and agriculture, political issues, social issues of climate change, food security going forward. A lot of the ideas brought up today are related to each other, similar to each other. I think it's good to keep in mind the stuff that we're learning as a group and from our peers, from our community members, from our mentors going forward. And it's important that, obviously a lot of the stuff we bring up can't be solved overnight, but going forward for people that eventually might become policymakers or might have a foot in the door somewhere where they can help out something successful come of the ideas that we talked about today. I just want to say thanks, obviously, to all our panelists, Chantal, Colby, and Audra. That was a super insightful final hour and a half. It was awesome having you guys here. Thanks as well to the rest of the presenters today. They were all fantastic, and I'm pretty sure the presentations will all be available on the Calgary Institute for the Humanities YouTube channel eventually for people that maybe missed part of the events today or came in late or weren't able to see everything. Those will be made available at a later date. Thank you to Dr. Settee for the keynote address and for Elder Goodstriker for kind of starting off our whole day this morning, and as well as to Maria Del Carmen for, as you can see in her video on Zoom, she's been busy at work over the course of the day putting together a visual work of what we've been discussing. I think this will also be made available on our website, a digital copy of it at a later date for those that are interested in seeing it. And then finally, over at Calgary Institute of Humanities, I want to thank Sean and Noreen again for their financial support, as well as the Graduate Student Association at the University of Calgary and the the Office of Indigenous Engagement, who helped provide funding to make this all happen. Thanks again to Ben and Marit. You know, they kind of put this group together. Chelsea, Gertrude, and I, we organized most Symposium, but if it wasn't for kind of this working group that they started over at CIH, this would not have been a thing. So kind of they gave us the platform that we can then build off of, and then hopefully it's can only grow into the future. And then finally, yeah, thanks to Gertrude and Chelsea, who were instrumental in making this all happen, you know, reaching out to people, getting everyone ready to present, organizing the schedule, getting the visuals, getting word out so that we can have participants to have these lively discussions about all the aspects about food and farming and all that. So I guess this formally ends our day-long symposium. But as I said before, this Zoom room will be left open for anyone that would like to remain and network, discuss, reach out to other people, and kind of cap off the day with some more, I guess, lighthearted and informal discussion about food studies.
Thank you, everybody.